And having said that, let's get started with this security day. So the first thing that we want to review today is about security related to AVI. And actually, we have quite plenty of things to mention here. The first thing that I want to speak about is the fact that if you have multiple applications managed by your AVI controller, at some point, you will need to create some isolation mechanism just to make sure that all the applications, they are not mixed and they are not sharing the same configuration. So if you remember, on day 2, we have reviewed something called service engine group. And I explained to you last week that for each virtual services, you will basically mention, or you will create a virtual service and you will assign a service engine group. In other words, a set of service engines. So service engine group by itself is the first kind of isolation mechanism that we have reviewed last week. And it's a data plane isolation mechanism, right? What I want to mention here is that we have other isolation mechanisms, and they are very useful because sometimes you don't want to create the same view for all your application. You want to separate them. You want to apply some different configurations, some different parameters. And obviously, to achieve this isolation mechanisms, they are very useful. So what kind of mechanisms the AVI solution bring? Well, the first thing that I want to mention here, and it's written at the bottom of the slide here, it's about VRF. So you know what is a VRF? It's a virtual routing table, basically. And one of the use cases that AVI brings here is you can use VRF inside Service Engine. One good use case for this is IP overlap. Let's say you have one company, your company has acquired another company, and you are not lucky, the other company is using the same IP address subnet. There is a conflict with the IPs. So to manage this use case, you can use VRF inside your service engine. And I think I showed you that last week, but I want to show you something else today related to VRF. So let me bring my demonstration environment here. And let me go to one of the my AVI controller. And once you see the list of your virtual service, you have also, if you go under infrastructure, you can see under cloud resources, all of your service engine per cloud. So my default cloud here that you can see is a vCenter cloud. I have also a bare metal cloud, but I will focus on this one here on the vCenter cloud. And if you see, if I edit one of my service engine here, you remember we have the first interface, which is more or less always the management interface here. And you can see here we have some VRF assigned to this interface. So this is something that you can leverage here. And one of the other use case where you can use VRF is for the NSX environment. So what is happening here is if I connect to my NSX environment, you will see how we leverage the VRF for such use case. So let me just connect to my NSX environment. Sorry, I should have done that before, but just missed that. So give me just 1 sec to connect. Here it is, and this should be this specific environment. Just 1 second. To bring the environment up. Should take a few seconds just to connect. Okay, so here it is. And I think is this guy here. So this guy is my AVI controller, and I have configured NSX in this AVI controller. Just give me 1 second to log in. Okay. So if I go under infrastructure, if I go under my cloud here, you can see here I have my NSX cloud, right? So we are leveraging the VRF capability in such environments. How so? If you go under cloud resources, if you go under VRF context here, you can see that for my NSXT environment, if I select it, you will see that I have for each tier one, AVI will create a VRF, right? So this is another use case where we are leveraging the VRF capability here. Again, for each tier one, we will configure a dedicated VRF. And under a specific VRF, of course, what I can do is I can see some static routes here. So don't get me wrong, we can visualize, we can see the routes, but here in this specific version, I believe we have a bug here. So I should upgrade this to the next one, which will give me the capability to show you the route. So basically what I'm saying here is under this VRF, which is again tied to my tier 1-A here, I will get at least one IP route saying, if you want to go outside of this specific network, just use the IP of the tier one. And this is exactly what my static route here is doing. But again, we have a bug in the UI, and I cannot show you that by using the UI. I could use the CLI, but it will take a little bit of time for me to show you that. So you have those IP routes, right? And remember, if you are using a specific this specific environment, NSXT in AVI, if I show you one of the applications that I have configured, going back to my virtual service list here, you can see that if I go under my first application, for instance, and I check the configuration, when you edit the VSVIPs that you have here, it will ask you for the tier one that you are using for this VSVIP, right? And something that you need to keep in mind for such environment, you need to make sure that the tier one that you are using for your VSVIP here is the same than the tier one that you are using for your pool. So if I show you my pool configuration under servers, I believe, where it is, I can't remember where it is. Here, you have the tier one logical router, right? And of course, because a virtual service is made basically of a VSVIP and servers, a pool of servers, of course, you cannot use two different tier one, or for an AVI terminology, two different VRF for the same virtual service. It has to be under the same tier one or under the same VRF for a single virtual service, right? So this is one application, or actually two applications, two use cases where you can use VRF in the NSXT use case. And of course, if you have some overlapping issues in your network, you can leverage this VRF capability. What else do we have in terms of isolation mechanism? Well, we have something called tenant, right? And it's quite impressive what we can do with the multi-tenancy in AVI. And you have different ways of configuring the tenant. You can say at the beginning when you install your AVI controller, oh, by the way, I just want one single tenant in my configuration. Or you can say, I want multiple tenants in my AVI configuration. And of course, as the VRF, it's a control plane isolation mechanism. The service engine group, they are a data plane isolation mechanism, and the tenants, they are a management plane isolation mechanism. So at each plane level, we have a different capability to isolate the different object or the traffic if we are talking about data plane. And tenants, they are one way of separating the different objects within the UI, within the API. It's another management isolation mechanism, right? And basically, when you create an object within a tenant, this object will be visible only in this tenant. We'll show you later if I create, let's say, a health monitor in tenant number 1. In this case, I can see only my health monitor in tenant number 1. Having said that, we have a specific tenant called the admin tenant. And when you create an object in the admin tenant, from the other tenants, you can see this object. You cannot edit and change this object, but at least you can see this object. Now, interestingly, what we are providing here is a way of linking the tenants with the service engine groups, right? And we have different options here. It depends on what you can do. The first one is the provider context, the one that you can see at the bottom of the slide here. For instance, here you say, I have my yellow applications and I want to make sure it goes under my tenant number 1. My purple applications are going under tenant number 2 and my green application under tenant number 3. However, for a data plane perspective, I want to share one service engine group for all those 3 applications, orange, purple, and green, right? In this case, you can leverage this provider context mode. And this is something that you want to think at the beginning. When you configure your AVI controller, you need to think about the design. Do I want to share all my service engine with all my tenants? Or do I want to use another mode, which is a tenant context mode? And for such use case here, as you can see that my tenant number 1 has a dedicated service engine group, same for the tenant number 2 and same for the tenant number 3. So you can see that we have the flexibility here. And in this case, if you want to separate your application in a specific tenant, you can decide to have also, for a data plane perspective, a specific service engine group. And as just a quick reminder here, a service engine belongs always to one or unique service engine group. There is a one-to-one mapping here. You cannot say this service engine belongs to service engine group 1 and also to service engine group 2. It does not work like this. It's only attached or assigned to a specific service engine group. And the good thing about the next use case here is if you want something between the provider context and the tenant context, we have something called mixed modes, right? And this mixed mode is basically saying, you see, for tenant number 1 and tenant number 2, we are sharing the same service engine group. In other words, we are sharing the same data plane. But for tenant number 3 here, we have a dedicated service engine group. So think about the different cloud environment that you know here. This can provide a lot of flexibility for your company and also for your application teams. Because those guys, they have sometimes applications that are extremely sensitive. So because those applications are extremely sensitive, they will need to have specific parameters, like what kind of HA mode I want to use. I want to use active-active for this application because I want to make sure it works all the time. But I don't want to share any data plane for this application with other applications because for a security standpoint, this application is also very sensitive. So I want to have a dedicated service engine for my application. This is what you will get, for instance, in tenant number 3 here. You have isolation for management plane because you have a dedicated tenant and you have also a dedicated service engine group. So you will get a dedicated data plane for this application, which reside inside this tenant number 3 here, right? So just wanted to show you all the capabilities. And again, when you think about the different cloud environments that you have, this is very useful. I showed you how it works with NSX, but think about Kubernetes, for instance. What do we have inside Kubernetes? We have namespaces, right? And those namespaces, what they are, it's basically a management plane isolation mechanism, exactly like our tenants, right? And if you want, again, to extend this to the data plane, you can leverage the service engine group. So let me show you in the UI how it works and how you can leverage this. So going back to my Academy controller here, I can show you a few things. The first thing that you will notice here is from the top down list here, I have the list of my tenants. And see how many tenants we have created for this workshop. Wow, I think I never see this amount of tenants in an AVI controller. So more than 2,000 tenants we have created. Why? Because for each account, for you guys, we have created a dedicated tenant. And because we have created a dedicated tenant, we are 100% sure that you will not conflict, you will not interfere with others' accounts, because again, for each account, there is a specific tenant which has been created. So the good thing is, let's say I want to have, like, let's say, to see all my application. If you see, I go to application here, I am under my dashboard, and I can see that I have created my 5 application here, right? But what I'm seeing here is just under the admin tenant, right? If you want to see if we have something on a specific tenant, you can always jump to the tenant that you want to check. And here you can see someone has created a virtual service doing the hands-on lab, probably, so that's good. But if you want to see all the virtual service, all the application which are inside this AVI controller, you can select this all tenant view, and you can see everything which has been created, right? So this is quite useful to see that. Now, if I go back to my, let's say, tenant 105 here, and let's say I am going under my templates, and I want to create a specific health monitor, right? Let's say for this tenant, I need a specific health monitor. So what I can do here, I can click on create, and I can say health monitor 105, as this is my tenant number, right? And you see when you create a health monitor, so you remember this health monitor will be applied to a pool, just to make sure that all the pool members, all the servers, they are up and running. You can define a type of health monitor. You can say I want to test my HTTP, my HTTPS, all those protocols. And by the way, I don't think I covered this on day 2, but you can also create an external, basically, type of health monitor. And this external type will give you the capability to add more protocols than the list that you can see here, right? So let's go back to something very easy. I will use HTTP here. Let's say I'm going to keep everything here by default. I just need to fill this one saying I want to see a 200 OK when I send something. And here you save this guy. And now you see I have my new health monitor, which is health monitor 105. Now, if I go back to my admin tenant here, you see, you don't see this health monitor 105 because again, this has been created from a specific tenant, which is not the admin tenant. Therefore, you can see it only from the tenant where you have created this specific object. However, if I do exactly the same here, and I create something called health monitor / admin, because I am inside the admin tenant, in this case, I can just save it like this. You see, I have this hm-admin. I switch back to my tenant 105 here, and I should be able to see it. So I can use this specific object, but I cannot modify it because again, the owner of the configuration is from the admin tenant. And as you can see here, I cannot modify this guy. This edit button has been removed directly from the API. If I want to modify it, I need to switch back to my admin tenant here. All right, so hopefully it makes sense. And Massimiliano, if you have questions, I see that you are responding already, but if you have questions that you want to share with everyone, don't hesitate. It's good to review them.
Yeah, for the moment, I think no, because we are. I'm reply to every question. So
Sounds good. All right. So this is a multi-tenancy. How do you create a tenant? Well, you go under administration here, and very easily, as you can see, under accounts, what do you have? You have tenants, right? So you can see all the tenants that we have created. It's plenty of them. I told you more than 2,000. So for such a use case, AVI scales very well. You can create a lot of tenants. And as I told you before, what we have done here, we have associated a tenant with a specific account for you guys, again, to make sure that you will not kill the AVI controller, and what we will do will stay under this specific tenant. Now that we are talking about account here, what I would like to show you is basically another feature that we bring, and that provides some capability in terms of role-based access control. So we call this airbag, role-based access control. And the good thing here is we can basically combine the two features. We can say we have tenant number 1, tenant number 2, tenant number 3. And of course, I have a system admin, which will own everything. This is this red box here. So I am the admin of the AVI controller. And of course, because I am the admin, I can see everything. But you can also say, okay, for some users, I want to make sure I reduce the scope of actions of those users. So this is the case, for instance, for the green here, the green user, he can see only tenant number 2, right? And you can see the blue user here, he can see only stuff in tenant number 3, but with not the full view. The green one here, you can see, he can see everything, right? Because he is tenant admin. And by the way, you guys in the AVI controller Academy, you are tenant admin, right? So you can do everything inside your specific tenant. The blue one, you can see only things related to application. So think about this as you have your application team, for instance, and you want them to see the logs. You want them to see the observability, real-time metric of their specific application. This is one of the use cases where you want to create a user account for them, and you will limit this user account inside a specific tenant where they have their application defined. And within this specific tenant, you want, again, to reduce the scope to make sure they can only view, I don't know, in read-only mode, the configuration, but also the logs, because they are very interested to see how the application that they are running behaves, right? So this is another use case. And let's say you have a third or fourth use case here, which is the security admin. Let's say you have the security team saying, okay, you know, guy, we know that inside the AVI controller, we have some SSL certs, some TLS certificates, right? And we want to manage them. And you know what? We are using an automation tool to do that, to make sure that the certificates, they are still valid, they are in agreement with the policy rules of your company. So we have developed, or we are using an automation tool to do that. And for such a team, in this case, a security team, you want to make sure that they will not mess the configuration of your AVI controller. So again, you want to give them access to all the tenants, as you can see here in purple, but you want to limit the action, the scope of action of this guy to only the TLS cert. So to achieve this, we have some roles that you guys can use out of the box. And from those roles, you can limit what you want to do. So let me show you, and let's try to apply this specific use case, the security admin use case, where those guys, they want to configure the SSL cert, and you as an admin of the AVI solution, you want to limit the scope of work or the scope of action of this specific account. So what you will do here, we'll go back to the UI, and you will go to the roles, right? And here you can see the list of roles that you can use out of the box. So you see you have one role for application, you have an operator role, which is basically a read-only role. We have a security admin role. You have different out-of-the-box roles already defined from the configuration when you create when you deploy your AVI controller. But what you can do is you can create a new one. And you will see that here we provide a good flexibility, because if I say, you remember my use case about TLS SSL, so I will call this guy SSL cert role, right? And here I'm going to say, you see, you have some categories. So here it's application, profile. So I don't want those guys to change anything or to view anything about application, about profiles, but under security here, I want them to make sure they can see and manage my SSL TLS certificate. So just click on this guy here, and now they have the rights, they have the access to manage this specific SSL TLS certificate. So if I can access to my environment, here it is. So from here, I think my RDP stops, but hopefully we'll come back. Can you still hear me okay, Massimiliano?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, but
Good.
I replied to. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. So that's good. So you can see here I have my SSL TLS certificate, which is enabled for writing. So I save this. And now what I will do, I will create a new user under account. And let's say if my user is already created, no, that's good. So what I will do, I will say, I want to create a new user. It will be my email address as the name, same as username. I will use my favorite password here. And my email is this one. I am not a super user here. And what I can do here, I can add a role, and I can say I want to basically to leverage this specific SSL cert roles that I have created here. And you see for all the tenants. So this is exactly what you have seen in the slide here. For all the tenants, I can access to my SSL cert management, right? So going back here, you can just, what I'm missing here, individual tenant role. I can say I want to be, for instance, for this specific tenant, I can say also I want to be a tenant admin. So you have the flexibility here, and you can say my default tenant is 105 here, right? So I save this guy. And if I just log out, and if I use my new account here, now you can see that by default, I can see my tenant 105, and I can see everything on it because I have configured this account to be tenant admin on tenant 105. But if I switch to another tenant here, like tenant 106, what we will see is, you see, I can access only to the templates and especially only to the SSL or TLS certificates. So again, you understand the capabilities that we provide thanks to those isolation mechanism. And let me show you another use case that you can use for your specific environment. So moving back to the slide here, let's say how you can basically bring together the tenants and the granular role-based access. Let's say you have your AVI controller, right? And you have 3 tenants. You have a tenant called dev provider. You have another tenant called pre-prod provider. And you have a third tenant called prod dedicated service engines. So as you can see here, the first one and the second one here, they are sharing the same data plane because they are sharing the same service engine group. However, because for the last one, we are talking about the production environment, we want to make sure this guy has a dedicated service engine group, a dedicated service data plane. So under this specific architecture, what I will do, let's say I have a need, I will create virtual service, blue virtual services. So I have my blue virtual services for my dev environment, my pre-prod environment, and also my production environment. And all of a sudden, I have this need. My blue application team, they are saying to me, I want to make sure we can see all the blue applications. So those guys, they are across tenants. They are objects that we have defined across tenants. And what we are providing here is a way of doing granular role-based access control. Because on each blue object, as you can see here, we have a role-based access control option. And this option gives us the capability to configure some key value pair. It's like in the public cloud, you have those tags, right? You can say, I want to add some tags to my virtual machine, and then I can leverage those tags later. And here you can see this is exactly the same. I have added a key value pair. The key is my app here, word, and the value is blue. And what I will define one specific role saying, by the way, all the objects which have the key value pair app equals blue, I want to see them, I want to be able to edit them as well. So across multi-tenant here, I can select which objects specifically I want to make available for this blue application team. Same for the green one here. I will create exactly the same, and same for the orange one here. And at the end, you have also the operation team, the ops. Those guys, they want to see everything. Probably they don't want to have the capability to edit or to change the configuration, but at least they want to see the blue, the green, and the orange application. So what you will do here for those guys, you will say, I want to make sure they view everything in read-only mode, all the application. So this is exactly what I have prepared for you as a quick demonstration here. So let me go to my AVI controller, this guy here. And as you can see, from the top, you will see that we have some different tenants. And you will notice we have this dev provider tenant, this pre-prod provider tenant, and this prod dedicated service engine tenant. So if I go basically under my dev provider as an admin, I will see all my application. You see the blue dev, the green dev, and the orange dev application, right? This is because I am an admin, right? If I log out here and I use this blue user, you will see that right now I will be able to see only my 3 tenants where we have basically blue objects. And you see, I cannot see my green or my orange application any longer. I can see only my blue application. And how I did that, it's just because, again, my virtual service here, if I edit this guy, you will see that under my advanced tab, I have a specific configuration for role-based access control saying this is a key value pair app equals blue. So let me be able to edit those objects with this key value pair. And I believe, let me double check this. If I go under my pool here, probably if I click on this airbag here, I will get exactly the same. This app equals blue value pair. And because of this, I can see all the objects which match this specific key value pairs, right? So quite interesting. to see that. And if I log out again now, and I use my ops, I think I have created one called ops account. Now I can see all the three specific tenants, and inside each tenant, I can see the different virtual services, right? And you see here, because I am in a read-only mode, I don't have the access or the capability to edit them. I can see the analytics, I can see everything, but I cannot change the configuration. So hopefully it makes sense, and hopefully you understand that those specific isolation mechanisms, they map very well with other kind of objects in other environments. I don't know if you remember. Let me sign out and go back to my admin account. On day one, I did a demonstration about AKO. You remember this is the specific component that we bring for Kubernetes. And if you remember this demonstration on Monday, I had different tenants. You see, linked with this environment, actually, I have 3 clusters. And as you can see here, for each cluster, I have created a specific tenant. So on my cluster number 1 here, I have nothing configured. That's why this is blank. But if I go on cluster number 2, where I did the demonstration here, you see all the virtual services that we have done directly from the Kubernetes API. So here you have some, again, good product capability to separate the different objects and to separate things inside your AVI controller. All right, hopefully it makes sense. Let me go back to the slide deck here. All right, let's talk about authentication. So you have your AVI controller, you have admins of your AVI controller, you have different users, you have different accounts, how you can provision those. You have different options. Well, for this workshop and in the AVI Controller Academy, we have created local accounts, and this is not the best way to do that, right? The best way is to leverage a remote user authentication. You see here the list of protocols that we do support for remote user authentication. You have LDAP, you have TACAX Plus, you have Keystone, especially in the case of OpenStack integration. You have also SAML. SAML is probably for us the best one to use here. And of course, you can leverage the specifics about roles and tenants that I have just explained before. One thing to remember here is if you want simultaneous remote user authentication, let's say simultaneously you want to leverage Keystone and LDAP. In this case, you will need to have 2 different AVI controllers. Having said that, for some combination, especially for instance, I think LDAP and SAML, you can use both of them within the same AVI controller. So it's a new capability that I think it's new from 22.1.1, which is the latest version. And for this one here, you can mix only, I believe, SAML and LDAP, but you cannot mix everything. So for others, you will need to have another AVI controller if you have to integrate, for instance, Keystone and LDAP. I'm pretty sure you will need to have one AVI controller for your LDAP integration and one AVI controller for your Keystone integration. All right, so again, best thing here is use remote user authentication. What about the admin account? Well, please make sure that you are not using the generic admin account as I do, right? Make sure that you have a personal account, which is for your admin. And what you want is you want to make sure that for each admin of your AVI controller, you have separate or you have different accounts, right? You don't want to use one generic account here for the admin because this is not best practice. And how you will identify who is doing what later, it's going to be complicated here. That's why the best thing is, let's say you have an admin team for AVI of, I don't know, 5, 10 users, 10 admins. In this case, you create 10 specific admin accounts for those guys. If you lose the admin password and you have only one admin account defined, in this case, you are stuck because there is no way of retrieving the account or resetting this admin account. There is no backdoors, there is nothing like this in the AVI controller. So this is why make sure that you are configuring more than one admin account. Make sure that those admin accounts are specific for each individual in the team. And as it's mentioned in the slide here, you can also reset your password by configuring your email, right? So this is what I told you. One of the best things here is to use the SAML capability of the product, just to make sure that you are not maintaining a local database of accounts in your AVI controller. And as I told you, this is exactly what we are doing for our demo system. If I go to, it's not this one here. Let me try to see. If I go to this guy here, you see, this is something that we are using for our demonstration environment. You see here, you have been logged out from AVI Vantage, so you may log in. And if you see what will happen here, I will don't configure any username or password. It is fully integrated with Workspace ONE, which is one of our identity provider. And it does not work from here because it recognizes that this VM that I am using here is not managed by VMware, so there is no trust, right, with this specific device. However, if I go back to my internet connection from my laptop, which is managed by VMware here, in this case, you see, if I bring this guy here, if I type c2.something like this, now we will go to SAML. You will see that this specific device is managed by VMware, so it is something that we can trust. And now I will access specifically to this AVI Academy controller here, seeing all the virtual service in this admin tenant, right? So you get my point. In such case, the users, they are not configured locally inside the AVI controller. The users, they are configured directly inside the IDP. Again, in this case, because we are working for VMware, it's easy for us to do the integration with Workspace ONE, but you can use any IDP here. The only prerequisite or requirement here is to make sure that your IDP supports SAML. If this is the case, no problem at all, we can integrate with it. All right, let me go back to the deck here. While we are talking about user account, about the AVI controller, I think it's good also to talk the ways how you can manage the AVI controller. So from the beginning, I showed you only the AVI UI of the AVI controller, but keep in mind that you have also a CLI, and this CLI is also quite useful because it gives you some information and some capabilities that you will not see within the UI. All right, so I say it again, everything is not exposed in the UI. I would say most of the main use cases, you will never need to connect to the CLI. However, for some corner use cases, in this case, you will not find those parameters in the AVI UI. You will need to go to the CLI. Let me give you an example. We spoke about scaling out a virtual service on day 2 last week. If you want to do auto scaling, which means basically you want your AVI controller to scale the amount of service engine or to scale the amount of service engine used by a virtual service based on the CPU consumption of service engine or based on the PPS, packet per second of service engine, or based on other criteria like the bandwidth. In this case, you will need to configure this using the CLI. So don't worry, we have a great knowledge base article just to document this, avinetworks.com/docs. You will find all the information. But I just wanted to show you a little bit about the CLI. And again, most of the time you will not need to access this, but it's good to know that it exists. And sometimes it helps to configure some specific configuration. So how to do that? Well, quite easy. You just need to SSH basically your AVI controller. And if you run your AVI controller on the top of a virtual machine, you type shell, and this will ask for your credential. So you type your username and your password again, the same than the one that you are using for to SSH the AVI controller. And all of a sudden, you will end up by being inside the AVI CLI. If you are running your AVI controller on the top of a container, in this case, you will need to SSH the bare metal server or the VM that you are using, and you will need to type this command here, docker exec -it AVI controller bash, to make sure that you are inside the container. And from this specific location inside the container, you do exactly the same. You type shell, you authenticate yourself, and you will bring inside the AVI CLI. So let me show you that live. So you see here, I have this specific UI, right? And if I SSH admin at the IP of my AVI controller, let's say this guy here, you can see I have 3 controllers because I have an AVI controller cluster here. I will select the first one. Yes, I type my wonderful password here, and I should go under my VM, right? This is not the AVI CLI. This is just the Ubuntu operating system that we are running for the AVI controller. And again, from this, I type shell, and from this, I authenticate again, and I go under my AVI CLI. And from here, it's pretty easy to use. You type show, let's say tab. You have all the objects that you can see with this show command. So if I want to see my virtual services here, you see here all the virtual services that I have inside this specific AVI controller. And actually, what I've just said is wrong, because if you see this specific AVI controller here, what I'm showing here is just the virtual service inside this admin tenant here. So let's say you want to see the virtual services under my cluster 2 here. You will need to go from here, and I think we have something called switch to tenant. And here I want to see my cluster 2. So I go to this specific tenant. And now if I show my virtual services here, you will see all the VS that we have configured for this Kubernetes cluster number 2 here, right? So you get the point. You have auto completion here. If you want to configure something, it's also quite easy. Let me switch back to my admin tenant here. Let's say I want to configure, so you type configure, service engine, for instance, service engine, service engine group, for instance. Let's say I want to configure my default group here. And now it tells you, oh, by the way, there is 2 default group in this configuration. There is one default group, which is connected to my cloud number 1, which is my default cloud here. And there is also one default group connected to my cloud number 2. So which one you want to use? I want to use the first one here. And here you see all the configuration that you have for a service engine group. So I took this one here because you see we have many parameters. Just to illustrate that I was saying before to you, I told you that sometimes in the UI, you will not get all the parameters. Some of the parameters, they are only available through the CLI or, of course, through the API. At the end of the day, if you are using the API, if you are using the CLI or if you are using the UI, you are just interacting with the AVI API. Keep this in mind. This is quite important and quite useful if you guys, you like automation, if you do plenty of automation, very easy to understand how the AVI API works. You just go, let's say, let me exit this guy. And from the CLI, we have other method here, but I will show you this one. You type terminal, what is the command? Display API details, right? And let's say you want to see all the details of the virtual service that we have configured in this admin tenant. Well, quite easy. You type show virtual service. And because I have enabled this specific command, terminal display API details, now what I will see is always this pretty print table that we are providing, but you can see above here is all the JSON configuration that is stored inside the AVI controller. So from this command here, I can see exactly what I have sent as a request to the AVI API. So I sent an HTTP GET just because I want to see the configuration, sorry. And you have also the API endpoint that I am using. So you see exactly what endpoint we are using. In this case, API/virtual service. And you have the response of the API with all the information. So right now it's ugly because it's JSON, but if you translate this JSON to YAML or to something more readable, you will see that it's very easy to understand the API structure. And this is quite cool because it gives you, again, all the details about how the data, how the objects they are configured. We will review this tomorrow as well on day 4 when we are talking about automation, right? So this is the CLI, and when it's about the CLI, you have different styles that you can use. You have, let's say, the Cisco kind of iOS style where you type configure something and it goes under this specific object. If you type configure service engine group, as you saw before, you go under this service engine group. And inside this service engine group, you can configure a specific value or a specific list of value, etc. Right? You have also the Linux style, which is more like in Linux, like in one command, you can configure plenty of things. So it's up to you. We support both of them. And again, this is good to know that along with the UI, you have also a CLI. And sometimes, you know, when you want to automate stuff, it's good also to think about the CLI or to think about the API. If you guys, you know, some programming language, or if you guys, you know, how to use tools like Ansible, Terraform, VRO, VRA, that will interact with the API at the end of the day. All right, when we are talking about the CLI, I just want to do like a small parenthesis about migration. Let's say you have some F5 that you want to migrate to AVI. How you can handle this? Well, actually, what we have done, and we have more or less the same for NSXT as well, is also to, and just one thing here, I see one comment from Vivek, just to let you know that this session is recorded, right? And we will share the recording at the end of the day. So you will get a copy of the recording. So what I was saying, sorry about that. What I was saying is if you have an F5 appliance, this appliance, you want to migrate application from this appliance, so VIP basically, to AVI. So how you do that? Well, you need to think that this process, we will need help from you to do that. Of course, we can help you. We have professional service organization inside VMware, and those guys, they do this kind of migration all the time. Just to share some numbers with you, we have migrated from more than 10,000 physical appliance F5 and NetScaler to AVI as today. And this is something that we know how to do that. So if you guys, you think that you need some help, we can help you. If you guys, you think, I know exactly my application, I know my F5 configuration by heart, and I can do that by myself, you guys, you are welcome to do that. However, don't migrate your F5 configuration as it is configured in F5, because some stuff, it does not make sense to migrate them like this. You need to think the AVI logic, right? And in the AVI logic, probably 2, 3, 4 VIP in F5 will be only one virtual service in AVI, because we have different capabilities. Think about the following. You have iRules in F5. And you are thinking, oh, now I know from the day 2 of the workshop, the equivalent of iRules, it's DataScript. Well, you're right, but most of the time you don't need to use those iRules because we have native capabilities in AVI, just built-in features that you can use just to replace your iRules. Because iRules, it's cool, you have kind of scripts, but they are difficult to maintain. So we prefer to give to you all the capabilities natively just out of the box. So think that this will require some work from you, but what we have done is we have created some scripts to configure, or let's say to translate the F5 configuration to AVI configuration. We are providing some scripts to configure NetScaler configuration to AVI configuration. And today, I think we have released this at the beginning of the summer, like July or August, I can't remember. We have also released the same tool to make sure that you guys, you can migrate your NSX legacy load balancer configuration to an AVI configuration, right? So if I show you basically in my AVI controller CLI here, if I exit this guy, and if I just go to my root user here, probably just let me just do SU probably. Okay. Anyway, what I wanted to show you is we have an F5 script, which is inside your AVI controller. I can't retrieve it, but I think, let me try again like this. If I can. No. Anyway, I can't remember, but there is an F5 script that you can leverage here. Same for NetScaler, and again, same for NSX. Those scripts, they are available in our GitHub repo. So you can use them. And basically what you will do, you will feed the script with your bigip.conf for the example of F5, right? So you will take your bigip.conf, you will just feed the script with that. And what the script will do, it will actually provide some, it will give you a CSV file. This CSV file, I don't think I have one here, but this will give you some status of each VIP, and it will tell you basically, oh, this VIP, I have translated the configuration, no problem, it's fine, it's already in JSON, and AVI can understand this configuration. Let's say for a VIP, which is a little bit more complicated, let's say you have a VIP with a complex iRules. Let's be honest, the tool will not be able to migrate this iRule. So it will provide you, it will tell you a warning saying, oh, for this VIP, guys, be careful because we are not able to translate these iRules. But as I told you, most of the iRules, probably about 50 to 75% of the iRules, we don't need to translate them because we already have the features built in. Let's take an example here. If you if you want to do an HTTP to HTTPS redirect, well, for these guys, no need to create an I rule, right? If you want to do some content switching, let's say based on the URI path, I want to go to this specific pool, to that specific pool. You don't need an I rule. So for plenty of example here, we know that we don't require I rules, and this is again quite useful to use this script. But it will not do everything for you. You will need to think. And again, you want to think with the AVI logic, not with the F5 logics when you are doing this migration. What about hardening the AVI controller, the AVI solution? Well, first of all, if you want to make sure that AVI as a product is secure, you can always contact your VMware sales representative and you can ask for the testing that we are doing. We do also some external pen testing just to make sure that the AVI product is safe. Of course, probably you will need to ask or to for getting those information, but you can definitely get this if it's required by your organization. After, the thing that we suggest is don't use a public IP for your AVI controller. We are doing this actually for this workshop because we want to make sure that you guys, you can connect to the AVI Academy controller. So the AVI Academy controller is configured with a public IP, but for your environment, please don't use a public IP. You want also to use ACLs or ACLs just to make sure that only a set of IPs can connect to your AVI controller, because you know that it's a sensitive component of the solution. The admin accounts, don't use a generic admin account. Use specific accounts for all the members of your AVI admin team. In terms of authentication, also, if you are using the API, just don't use the basic authentication, but use a session-based authentication method. And also, please make sure you are up to date with the software. It's a key thing. Of course, as the time goes by, you will see that we have some security issues, security alert, like every vendors. We are at the same level here. So make sure that you are using the version of software which is not outdated. And when it's about upgrade, I will tell you tomorrow exactly how it works, how you can upgrade easily the AVI solution, upgrading the different components like the AVI controller, but also the AVI service engines at the same time or at different times. So it's your choice, and you will see how easy it is again to upgrade the entire solution. All right, so having said that, we covered the first chapter of the day about securing the AVI solution. So before moving to application security, any questions or anything you want to share, Massimiliano?
Oh, for the moment, I'm replying all the message, and it seems all is okay.
Good. So in this case, let's move on. Let's continue. So we have reviewed the security related to the AVI controller, all the isolation mechanisms that we have. Now let's talk about how from the AVI solution feature set, you can secure your application. So let me bring the new slide deck for this guy. So where it is, it's just here. So when it's about security for your application, we bring quite a good amount of features. And again, you can see them in this slide. So we are talking about DDoS, we are talking about layer 3, layer 4 ACLs or ACLs to protect your application. Of course, we are talking about encryption, especially with SSL and TLS, and this one will be actually the next entire chapter. We are also providing some layer 7 or application, again, rules or policies to protect your application. One big thing is also application rate limiting. So we have many criteria. You will see that where we can rate limit the traffic toward your application. We are doing also protocol validation. So we want to make sure that when we receive something from your client of your application, it's a clean request. It's a legitimate request. It's not here to hurt or to create some issue with your application, right? And we have web application firewall as a features that you can leverage. And again, everything here, we will review SSL and web application firewall in 2 separate chapters that will be just after the break. We will review first SSL and TLS, and second, we will review web application firewall. And for all of those features, we don't want you to be blind. We want to provide plenty of logs, plenty of capabilities in terms of observability, real-time metrics, to make sure that you guys, you know exactly what is happening. Let's say if one of the service engine, remember this is the data plane of the solution, if it drop a packet, we want to understand the why behind the scene, right? And to do that, of course, you can see the configuration, but what you want is also to see that in the analytics saying, oh, AVI has dropped this packet because of X, Y, Z, right? So this is what we provide. And for this chapter, I have few demonstrations that I want to do. So I will go back and forth as usual from the slide deck to my AVI controller, and I will see you how it works. So let's start by the DDoS protection, right? So when it's about DDoS protection, what I want to show you is from our demo system here. I have one of the virtual service, which is not here, but there. If I go to my demo tenant here, I have one of the virtual service called DDoS victim, right? So if I click on it, directly from the analytics here, I can go to my security tab here. All right, on day one, you remember I showed you plenty of things regarding the analytics and logs. We will review this entirely tomorrow, but right now I want to investigate on this security, right, as it is security day. And what you can see is some information, some statistics related to security. First, you can see the certificate type, right? So you have some information about which kind of certificate we are using, and this is per application, actually. You see these statistics are related to this DDoS victim application. You see also exactly which kind of TLS version we are using. This is quite interesting here because sometimes, you know, people tells you, oh, you need to retire this specific version of SSL or TLS because it's dangerous, it's weak, it is outdated. So you want probably, before doing that, you want to have some information about how many, what is the ratio of people using this specific version. So very easily here, from the TLS version statistic, you can define this, right? You can also you have some information about the SSL score of this application. If you want to understand why we have, let's say, a penalty, you will get those information here as well. But what we are talking about here is about DDoS, right? So if I just click under this DDoS view here, what I will get is some information about what is going on for DDoS. And as you can see here, I have at least one attack here. This attack is coming from this specific IP. Of course, this is a private IP, so there is no autonomous system associated with this specific IP. But if it was a public IP, of course, we know exactly from which AS it is coming, and therefore it allows you to contact this specific AS to ask for a reason about this malicious traffic, right? And within or for this specific IP, for this specific attack, you have also the name here of the attacks that we are receiving for this specific application. So again, you are not blind. We don't have a lot of traffic like this here. So it's just to show you the capability. You know from where it comes. You know exactly what type of attack we are receiving for this application. And what the AVI controller will do automatically, it will ban this IP for 30 minutes, just to protect your application. If you don't like it, of course, you can change this behavior, but this is what will happen by default here. So this is the visibility for the DDoS, but it goes beyond that, right? What you can do is also to protect your application against those specific DDoS attack. So how can you do that? Well, if I go to my AVI controller, I have prepared a first demonstration here to show you how you can do that. But before doing this demonstration, I want to show you a few things. First, you remember what I have told you on day 2. When you are looking for features in AVI, you need to follow a certain flow. The flow is first, remember, if you are looking for parameters which are client-facing configuration, those parameters, they will be inside the virtual service. If you are looking for server-facing configuration, those parameters will be inside the pool object. So this is the first, let's say, starting point. And then after, remember what I've told you on day 2, it's about trying the templates first. You check what you can configure inside the template. If you cannot find what you are looking for in the template, you can always go to the policy. And if you cannot find what you are looking for in the policy, you go for the data script. All right, so this is the flow. You determine where it is, virtual service or pool, and after you check for the templates, if you cannot find what you are looking for in the templates, you go to the policy. If you can't find in the policy, you are thinking about the data script. And as I told you on day 2 last week, for the data script, we have a rich repo that we can share with you where we have plenty of examples that you can reuse. So don't start a data script from scratch. Just ask for help and we will be happy to direct you to the documentation. So this is the flow of how you can find something for load balancing, but it's the same for security. So what I will do here, I will go back to my admin tenant here. And following this flow, I want to configure some rules or some parameters to avoid DDoS, right? So I have a specific application, which is called App Security here. And if I go to my virtual service list, I have the capability to edit my application from this button here. And you see here, let's try to apply the logic that I just mentioned. Let's say I'm looking for DDoS. So first thing, I want to check the profile. And here you can see I have my TCP UDP profile and I have my application profile. DDoS, is it related to TCP or UDP? Well, it could be. Is it also related to application? Yes, it could be as well. You can have DDoS about the TCP connection, but also DDoS about request per second, which is tied to application. So the common denominator here is my application profile, right? So I can have a very quick look on my TCP UDP profile, but you will see if you have a look on your side, there is nothing really linked to DDoS here. Some values here can be used for attack, but the one that I want to demonstrate is more inside the application profile. So let's go to the application profile here. And you see you have a tab for DDoS. So if I go to DDoS here, you see here you have some rate limits. And I want to demonstrate and to show you how those guys works. So you have some rate limits that you can apply. So before showing you how it works, what I want to do is I want to make sure that this application, this security application works. So what I will do here, I will basically, from my client, I will use this specific command. And as you can see, this specific command is leveraging AVI, which is Apache benchmark. So it's just a binary that I'm using to send plenty of requests to my application. And you see I'm sending 40 requests, and the level of concurrency here is 40 as well. So without any mechanism to protect my application here, I expect that I will get 40 responses for my application. And as you can see here, I'm sending 40 requests, you can see, and I'm receiving 40 successful responses from my application. So now you can consider this a little bit like a DDoS, right? Because I'm sending plenty of requests. It's not the normal behavior from one client. So what I want to show you first, let me go back to my AVI controller here. Here, I have prepared a specific application profile for this demonstration. And you see it's called HTTP rate limit request from client. So I will load this guy and I will edit this application profile. Going back to my DDoS here, what I have selected, you have plenty of rate limits that you can use. And this guy here is using rate limit request from a client to all, I think it's from a client to all URLs. Let me check. From a client to all URLs, right? So I'm saying basically, I want to make sure that if there is more than 10 requests per second, because as you can see here, this is the time period or the time interval here, I will do some action. And here you have the choice. If you just want to see some visibility here, you can say, I want to report only. If you want to affect the data plane, if you want to drop some packets here, you can influence this by using either a closed TCP connection. You can go to a specific web page saying, hey guys, you are sending too much of requests, please slow down, and you will go back to the application. Or you can even say, this traffic is very noisy, it's not good for me, I will send this traffic to the competition by sending an HTTP request. An HTTP redirect, right? So just for this demonstration, very simply here, I will just choose this closed TCP connection. So I save this specific application profile, and now it will be applied for this virtual service. I save it, and what I expect here is to see something different. You see, before I sent 40, I received 40. Now I'm sending 40, and I'm receiving 9, right? So it depends of the time that I'm using here, but it goes between 9 and 10, exactly as I have configured. So from a client here, I am saying from a specific client, I want to limit the amount of requests that we are receiving for my application. So this is one thing that I can do just to make sure that my application is secured. Now that we have reviewed that, I want to show you more advanced capability to protect your application. One thing that I want to show you is, let's say, or let me tell you something first. If you are using this from one client, that's good. But in the reality, all the traffic is not coming from the same IP, right? From the same client. You will get the same traffic from different clients. So this is a good starting point, but it's not enough. So what you want to do, you want probably to protect your application based on another criteria than the client. And you know what? Going back to the UI here, we have plenty of other criteria that I want to show you. At least one of them is quite nice. Let me just explain my next demonstration, which is very close to this one, but it uses another criteria. So this demonstration, let me stop this guy here. It's about an application within my Kubernetes environment. So just this morning, before the start of this workshop, I have created an application. And this application is, again, within my cluster number 2, if I show you where it is, I think it's this guy here. No, it's probably, just let me exit this and just retrieve all the details of my demonstration here. If I connect to this master node here, and if I show you all the pods that I have inside this Kubernetes cluster, I have created this wonderful Google Boutique application, right? So you see all the components. It's a kind of microservices application. You see, it's not only one pod. I have my cart microservice. I have my checkout microservice, my currency microservice, my email, my front end, etc. So you have everything which has been configured inside this default namespace, right? And what I have done this morning, I have created a virtual service from Kubernetes by leveraging the Kubernetes ingress object, right? And this cluster is in sync with my AVI controller, thanks to AVI AKO, which is running just here, you see. And it has created an object for this ingress. If I go back to my AVI controller here, you see this is this boutique2.vcenter.avi.com. And if I go to this specific URL here, let me just refresh this page here. You see, this is my beautiful page. So I can decide I want to add this, this item here on my cart, and I have my application working, right? I can do place an order here, and you order it complete, blah, blah, blah. So I have my application up and running, and it's inside Kubernetes. Now the question is, how can I secure this application to make sure that I don't receive a DDoS attack and it can basically affect my entire Kubernetes cluster, it can affect my application. So I want to make sure that I can add a layer of security, especially for the north-south traffic here, right? So let me show you the files that I have used. You will understand it's very easy. First, I have created an ingress, which is this guy here. And you see my ingress is saying, basically, I want to use this FQDN. And this FQDN is going to use as a backend a service which is called cluster IP. And this service cluster IP here has been defined on this object. You see cluster IP, and I'm saying basically, I have an app selector front end. So all the pods which are running this app selector front end here, so basically it should be this guy here, they are my backend server. This is exactly how it has been configured. And if I go back to the AVI controller here, going to the dashboard, you see this boutique 2 blah, blah, blah. If I extend this guy, the IP is .12 here. So I have only one pod behind this virtual service. And again, the use case here, I want to secure this ingress. I want to secure this specific application. How can I do that? Directly from Kubernetes, we have the option to apply a specific CRD that I have already applied this morning, so I will not do it again. But you see, this CRD is saying basically, oh, for this specific FQDN, so this application, the same that has been defined for my ingress here, I want to apply a specific profile. This profile is HTTP rate limit request per cookie. You remember before it was per client or per IP. Now it's per cookie. So you want to make sure that for a specific cookie that we are using in this app, we want to make sure we can rate limit the traffic. So it's not now connected, or it's not in relation with the client, it's in relation with the cookie. So if I check this configuration, actually, automatically, because of this CRD, if I edit this virtual service, I should see that this has been applied. So from Kubernetes directly, you can apply some advanced features by leveraging the CRD that we are providing out of the box with a Helm chart when you install AKO, right? So if I check the configuration of these guys, this HTTP rate limit request per cookie, this is where I have a little thing that I need to improve here, because I will need to go to my admin tab here just to edit this object. I should have created this in the same tenant, but I didn't. So if I go under my templates, application, you see I have this object already created. If I edit this object here, I'm going to see the DDoS tab. And here, see, I'm saying I want to rate limit the HTTP header or cookie. And I define here the name of my cookie, which is shop session ID. And if I see more than 5, in this case, I will close the TCP connection, right? So let me try to use a command that I was using here. So basically here, I'm sending 100 requests. And for doing this one, I'm using curl, right? So I will do like a loop until from 1 to 100, and I will send those commands. So don't expect to see a very precise result here, because curl needs some time to send those 100 requests, right? So remember, inside the configuration here, I have 5, but I don't expect to see this value of 5, because curl takes more than 1 second, which is the time period defined here, to send those 100 requests. So let's see. I'm gonna send, oh, you know what we can do is first, let's configure this to 100, save, yes, and let's see what will happen, okay? So I'm sending 100 requests, and I have received 100 successful responses. So basically here, for AVI, no packet dropped, everything is responded successfully. So going back to my AVI controller here, I will edit this configuration, go to my DDoS tab here, and I know that this has been used inside my virtual service, this profile. So I want to move this to 5. Save, yes, save, and now you see it drops. It will not drop to 5 because, again, it takes more than 1 second for curl to send those 100 requests. That's why it's not 5 that you are seeing in the screen. But as you can see in my command just here, you see that I am using this specific shop session ID cookie, and this is always the same. So because it's always the same, AVI says, I don't care about the IP source of this request. I just check for this session ID. If it's the same, I want to make sure I will reduce basically the amount of traffic going to my application. So hopefully it makes sense, and it gives you some ideas of what we can do in terms of DDoS. Remember the flow, you check first the profile. This is what we are doing. You can also do some stuff on the policy, and then after on the data script. So having demonstrating this one, and hopefully you understand the value that you can leverage this for your application, which are based on virtual machines, bare metal servers. But in this use case, it's based on container environments, Kubernetes, to name it properly. All right, so let me go back here. So we reviewed DDoS protection, right? You want also to speak about layer 3, layer 4 ACLs or ACLs or policies that you can enable, right? And to do that, let me go directly again to the UI, because I think this is the best to illustrate how it works. Going back to my AVI controller here, let me go to my application here, and let's go to my application Hello World, right? And if you want to enable a policy, you just edit your application here. And from this application, you review the profile, you can go to the policies. And from the policy, you have different type of policy. Basically, layer 3, layer 4, they are called network security, or you have application policies, which are tied to the application protocol that you have defined here. So remember here, we are talking about HTTP. That's why the policy here, they are about HTTP. If you change the application profile to DNS, of course, the policies, they will be tied to DNS. So let's start with network security, layer 3, layer 4. So what do you expect here? Well, it will be about what you can do based on layer 3, layer 4 criteria. You define some match, and you define some actions if the traffic matches the criteria that you have defined. So how you do that? Very extremely easy. You just leverage the UI, or of course you can do that by the API. We'll show you that later. But basically here you have this plus button, you give it a name to your rule, and you create some matching rules, or you define some criteria. And here you say, I want to make sure that if the service port, so this is TCP or UDP port number, or if the client IP, this is the IP address of the client, layer 3, basically is matching this specific value. In this case, you create an action. So let's say if my service port is TCP 80, for instance, I want to allow, I want to deny, or I want to rate limit the traffic. So quite easy, quite straightforward to apply. This is, let's say, the basic, right? But something else that I want to show you is about two things that you can leverage from those layer 3, layer 4 policies. The first one, it's about IP reputation database. And the second one is about the GeoDB IP database, right? IP reputation, very useful, because you know that some of the traffic is coming from locations that you don't like. You don't want this traffic to go to your application, because you know that traffic coming from bots, traffic coming from specific IPs, it's not good for your application. So out of the box, you have the enterprise license. You don't need to pay anything else. You can get this specific IP reputation database. Let me show you. Basically, you can just select this Webroot, which it's a third-party provider, very well known in the industry for IP reputation database. So you select it, and from here, you can leverage the database. And you can say, oh, by the way, all the traffic, not this one, sorry, all the traffic coming from the botnet, I want to make sure I deny it, or I rate limit this guy to a very low value. So again, what we are saying here, we want to filter. The idea is we want to make sure that the traffic hitting your application is legitimate, right? So we have plenty of mechanism to make sure that you can avoid DDoS, as we reviewed, but also that the source of the traffic is checked and that this traffic is legitimate. So here you can say, I want to remove the traffic coming from the botnet, but also from the cloud, also from blah, blah, blah. You see the list of categories that we have inside this database. And again, this database will be updated fully automatically. You remember, if you are using the tier for your license, which allows this, sorry. This is the cloud service tier. In this case, automatically your AVI controller will communicate with VMware Cloud Services saying, I want to update this component when there is an update available, right? And you can opt in or you can opt out for this. But let's go back to our topic here. IP reputation database, you can select and you can leverage this out of the box. And you define basically, I want to deny this traffic, rate limit this traffic, or allow this traffic. The second use case that I want to show you is about GeoDB. So basically here you select the GeoDB that we are also providing out of the box. And you can say, by the way, this GeoDB is cool. I want to use it. I want to basically define from my client IP. I will need to create, excuse me, I will need to create an IP group here. And you can call this IP group, for instance, Canada here, or ACL Canada. And from this here, you select the country code. You say, I want to remove Canada from my application. You save this guy, and all the traffic coming from Canada, you can rate limit again, or you can deny the traffic again, right? So this is something, again, that the policy can handle for you. The policies, they are very well written in the product. So my point here is, yes, it will scale very well. The way how they have been written in the product will allow the policy to scale quite a lot. And just to answer one question or one comment that I see on the chat window. One thing that I want to mention as well is, when I see some UI like this, I'm always thinking that's good, but what if you have 100 or even 1,000 of virtual service and you want to apply a specific ACL or access list for this application? So you see how it is. You have some name, you define a client IP address here, you define some action. So it seems to be nice in the UI, but what about the API? So I have prepared a small demonstration here to show you that it's very easy to automate this. Let's say my use case is that I know that I have one IP that I want to ban to all my application, right? So what I will do first, I will make sure that this application works. So I will basically just use this specific command here, which is just a while true loop, saying I want to go to this app hello world vcenter.avi.com application in a loop, right? So I can see the answer. It works. Load balancing is happening between my 203 server and my 204 server. So that's nice. Let's say this client 0 here is an IP or client that I want to ban for multiple applications. So again, do you think it will scale if I have a list of 100 of applications, if I need to click on each of them individually? Well, if you like it, good for you, but for me, it's not good because, again, it will take me hours to do that. And at some point, something will interrupt me and I will do a mistake. So I prefer to automate those kind of things. And just to show you here, I have one specific demonstration where I am using Ansible to automate basically this. So if I show you the variables of this here, it's quite easy to understand. This Ansible playbook will create an ACL, which is called ACL deny demo workshop, right? And you see the IP inside this specific IP group will be this guy here, 131.11. And actually, if I show you, I think it should be the IP of this guy, 131.11, right? So I will do that. And then basically for all my virtual service configured on this AVI controller, I will apply this specific network policy to ban the traffic. You see, it's a deny option here. And I will have just some virtual service that I don't want to apply this configuration. So I have a list of an exclusion list, basically, where I say, okay, apply to all of them, except those virtual service, right? So you see that. So let's try to do it. And I'm just using a specific file here, as you can see, to load the credential of my AVI controller. And by doing so, I expect that first, it will get all the virtual service details. You see, it creates an IP group. You see exactly the name of this IP group. And what it will do, it will create network policies. So you see, it just it did it for all the virtual service except the ones that I have specified on this file. Sorry, this file here, as you can see. But all the yellow one, I have applied this specific policy. And then it will update this virtual service by applying this network policy that we have created for each of the virtual service. So let's see if I go back to my client. You see here, traffic is denied, and everything has been done fully automatically. So the point here again is, because of microservices, because of the nature of the business, you have plenty of application to manage. And if you spend your time to click on UI like this, again, it does not scale. If you use automation, it is very easy to do stuff very quickly and very precisely, leveraging the API and all the integration that we have with different tools. In this case, again, I am using Ansible, but you will see tomorrow we can use also different other tools. And now you see the traffic to my application does not work any longer because I have this IP group which has been configured and applied for my virtual services. So going back to my template here, if you go under policy, IP group, what do you see? You see this new ACL, which has been configured automatically by Ansible, deny demo workshop. And if I go to my virtual service here, if I check, for instance, the one that I am testing, if you go under policy, you see that there is a rule 1, which says client IP is in group ACL deny blah, 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 action deny, right? So I expect that if I remove this guy, save, I should get my traffic back already working for this specific client. So this is layer 3, layer 4, how it works. Again, you have different criteria based on IP, based on TCP UDP port. You can leverage also the IP reputation database. You can leverage the geo database. So you have plenty of options to secure your application here. What else? Let me go back to the UI and show you also other capabilities to secure your application. Let's say you want to make sure that your application is safe. And one way of doing this is to configure some HTTP header. So you know that sometimes to have your application secure, you need to configure some HTTP header. And of course, you can do that at the HTTP server level, but you want to enforce that your load balancer will do that anyway, right? So to do that, you need to make sure that the response from the server and probably sometimes also the request from the client, you want to modify, you want to add, you want to remove some headers. So how you can do that? Again, this is where the policies, they are very useful because you can leverage those objects to do that from the UI, and you can configure your application for the HTTP headers. So if I go back to this application security, I have configured this for you already. If I go under my policies, and you remember I have this HTTP rate limit request from the application profile, the one that we were using before. But under my policies, I am using some HTTP request rule here and HTTP response rule. So let's edit what I have done. If I edit this rule 1 here, what I'm doing is basically I have created 3 actions. My first action is replace header. So if you see a specific header, which is called x-my header to be replaced, I want to replace the value by NSX LB, right? If you have a specific header called x-my header to be deleted, I want to remove this header. If you want to add a new header towards the application server instances, in this case, you see you have this add header, and this will apply for this specific x-my header to be added, and the custom value is AVI, right? So very easily from the HTTP request, I can replace an existing header, I can remove a header, and I can add a new one. You see how easy it is? And again, what you are seeing here has been configured through the API. Trust me, I showed you that for the network 3 layer 4 policy is it's exactly the same for this application policy. And more interesting as well, if you want to make sure that you control what is going to be inside the HTTP response for the HTTP headers, look, you have this HTTP response policy. And what do we have here? I have created also a rule saying I want to make sure that there is this content security policy header, just to make sure my application is also, again, secure for a header perspective. And the custom value here is policy. This will avoid your browser of your client doing some silly things to your application, right? So we have this capability. So let's double check how it works and if it works. So I'm going to close this guy. I don't want to do any change on this configuration. And what I will do, I will go back to my client. So this guy works, and I want to use one of my commands that I have somewhere here. Where is this one without cookie, with cookie? Here it is. So let's have a look on this guy here, what I'm doing. So I'm sending a request by using curl, and you see here I'm using header options. And I'm saying I want to send this specific header, which is called my header to be replaced. So the value is AVI123, okay? And I am sending also a header, which I want to be deleted. And the value is also AVI123. And the FQDN of my application is app-security.vcenter.avi.com. So we are talking about this guy here, right? And again, when it's about security, remember the logs, they are always a good location if you want to troubleshoot what is happening. So I'm going to the logs, and what I will do here, I will send basically this curl request. Okay. And what I want to do here, let's say I know that the request is coming with this header AV123 for this guy here and for that guy there. So I will go back here. I will just check the past 15 minutes, and I will filter by RV123. So probably I need to add the non-significant logs here. And here it is. You see the time, 11:50. The break is not too far, 11:50. And if I just extend this guy here, what do I have? Well, you don't see the headers, except if you click on this button, View All Headers. So remember what I was sending, this header to be replaced, AV123, and to be deleted, AV123. Just to double check this, to be replaced, AV123, and to be deleted, AV123. So you see exactly what I have sent. If I go here, what I send to the application server instances is what? Is the to be replaced has become NSX ALB instead of AV123. To be deleted, you see it is highlighted in red because it has been removed. And there is a new one here which has been added to be added AVI, right? So you get my point here. You can do whatever you want for the HTTP header to make sure that they can secure your application for the request, but not only. If I extend this guy here, you see that this is what I have received from the server. And what do I have? I have added one here, which is this guy, the content security policy with the value of policy. So again here, very easily, thanks to the UI, but at the end of the day, again, everything is available through the API. I was able to secure my application to make sure, especially by leveraging the HTTP headers that we are receiving and we are sending to this application. All right, so hopefully it makes sense. So we have reviewed quite a few of the mechanisms that you can leverage for security. One thing that I would like to do just before the break is to speak about this one here. So what is the idea of this one? The idea of this one is, of course, some application you want to provide, you want to make sure that only authenticated customers or clients can access to this application. And you have different choice here. You can, let's say, you can add some codes in your, some lines of code in your application, and to create more stuff, more work for your application team, or you can leverage modern authentication mechanism here. And this is the purpose of this slide. Basically, you have your application team saying, I have this application, I want to make sure that only the authenticated user can access to it. And if you have this such request, you can leverage the different protocols that AVI support to provide authentication. And one of them, I just said one of them, it's not the only one, but one of them is SAML, right? And if you want to leverage SAML, I want to show you how easy it is, again, to configure AVI with one of your IDP. I said one of your IDP because in this demonstration, I will show you how it works with Workspace ONE, because easy for me to get one IDP based on this product, but you can leverage, you can use whatever IDP you want. The only prerequisite here is to make sure that it supports SAML, right? If it's the case, you are safe, you can use it, and you can integrate AVI, the AVI solution, with your IDP. So let me show you again in 2 minutes how you can do that. Well, if I go under one of my application, let's say this guy here, App AVI. If I edit the configuration, you will see that under policies, we have reviewed the network security policy, HTTP security, request, response, blah, blah, blah. And there is this data script that you know about. It's the equivalent of iRules, but very more modern. But we have also this access tab, right? And this is the one that we want to target here. If you want to authenticate a user before going to their application servers, you want to use this access tab here. So just to make sure here, if I just go to my application, let's review the FQDN here. So this is this app-avi.vcenter.avi.com. This is this application here. So let me just enable it. You see it works. No authentication required, right? So what I will do here, I will just close this tab, and we will try it later again. I want to show you how quickly I can configure authentication. So again, I edit this configuration, this virtual service, under policies, under access, and I create a SAML policy here. And just because here we are, in this version, we are still migrating some component of the UI, I will need to exit this, this window to create first, I think, an SSO authentication object. So let me just exit this guy here, but I believe in the next release this will be fixed. But if I go under templates, I think I need to create what we called under security, what we called an authentication profile. So I create one authentication profile here. I call this guy SSO_workspace1. The type is SAML. Yes, and here it asks you for the IDP metadata. So what I will go here, I will go to this is, let me just try to keep this from the beginning. So I will go to my Workspace ONE console here. And from here, I will go to my console. And I will go here to my, I think it's web application, if I remember well, to my settings. And you see I have the SAML metadata here. So I copy the URL of the SAML metadata. I paste the URL here. I will just basically format this as it is. So view page source. I copy everything here. And basically, I paste those information here, right? So this is the only things that I need to do here. So I have my authentication profile, which is type of SAML, which is configured. So now I can go back to my virtual service, the ones that I want to add authentication. I edit this guy here, going under policies, under access. I want to enable SAML. I want to create an SSO policy here. So let's call this guy SSO policy underscore workspace one. The type is SAML, and this is where I will need to assign this authentication profile. And you see from here right now, we have a broken kind of things because we cannot create one. That's why I did that just before this specific window here. So I assign the ones that I have created, I save it, and the only thing that I will need to specify here is the entity ID and the SSO URL. So going back to my workspace one console here, I have created an application already. So I just need to edit this specific application. I want to go on my configuration here. I want to just copy basically the entity ID, which is this guy here. I paste this, sorry, just here. And the SSO URL, it should be that guy here. And be careful because there is a trailing slash here that you need to copy as well. So I just paste this value here. I save this guy, and I should be good to go. So again, I will just go back to my application. And now you see here it asks me my credentials. So I am using my credential here, and I sign in, and now I can go to my application. So you see, it took me like 5 minutes. Of course, I have my workspace one, my IDP already up and running. But for an AVI standpoint here, you see how easy it is. You just need basically to sync your AVI controller with your IDP, and everything will be done automatically. We will be redirected to your IDP. In this case, workspace one, you just input your username, password, and if you have good memory with your password, you can access to your application, right? So this is another security aspect that you want to think about. If you have authentication requests for your application, again, you can leverage this SAML or the other type of authentication that we do support. You saw the list in the UI. You can check on the Academy controller which protocol we do support, or if you have this question, just raise it in the Q&A, and I'm sure Massimiliano can help for this one. All right, so where are we? This one, we can skip it. So it's 12:01, so even 12:02 here. So I suggest we can have a break until 12:20, and we will resume this day with the SSL chapter, and we will close this session with web application firewall for today. Just before going for the break, any questions, anything you want to share or to add, Massimiliano?
No, for my side is all okay. You will be very clear on your explanation.
Thank you very much. And again, guys, if you have any questions, you don't hesitate to ask in the Q&A. For everyone, this session is recorded. You will get a copy of the slide deck
Yes,
later,
exactly.
so
This
don't worry.
was most participant asked about the record and the slide. So I say to all that is send by email at the end of these 4 days.
Exactly. And also, if you have any specific question, let's say we didn't cover a specific topic that you want to know, You can always send an email to learnavi@vmware.com. I just paste this email address in the chat window. Having said that, I think it will be good for me to stop talking for a few minutes, and we can resume this at 12:20 at this specific time zone here. All right. Thank you, Massimiliano, for the help this morning. You have a wonderful break, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice. And let me try to just to show you the right deck here. This one is finished. This one is finished. Okay. All right. So let's cover TLS SSL. And to start with, let's talk about, usually when it's about SSL and TLS, we think about hardware load balancers, because you want your load balancer to scale very high to make sure that you can reach a very large amount of SSL, TLS, TPS. And this is why in front of your applications, you are installing this big physical appliance to make sure you can scale. And something that we want to mention is this is an important topic, because of course you want to scale, but you want to have TLS everywhere. And when you think about TLS everywhere, you need to make sure you have the flexibility to bring this for each kind of traffic. It could be north-south traffic, it could be east-west traffic, and you want to make sure that TLS is enabled. You don't want to say, I don't have enough resources here. You want to make TLS enabled for all your traffic inside your SDDC and from the traffic outside your SDDC till the end of the day. Till the end of your application. So in respect with that, this slide is a little bit marketing, but it's quite important to make sure you guys, you agree with this one. Hardware versus software. So you have the option here to change and to think about, do I need an hardware appliance, or can I change moving from my hardware appliance to software appliance, or to virtualized solution, or to a software-defined load balancing solution as we provide with the AVI solution. Why software? Well, as you can see, first of all, is more secure. The code is not tied to a specific chip, to a specific ASIC. It's not tied to a specific FPGA. It's just software. So it's more secure, because if tomorrow we need to change something, it's only lines of code to change on our side. And you can expect more reactivity than if you need to change the software, and at some point you need to also make sure that this new software will work with hardware, FPGA, for instance. And the more important thing here is also the fact that it's more scalable. This is why when usually you have a pair of active standby legacy load balancer, it's only at one location of your SDDC, right? And if you think about this location, this is probably good for north-south traffic, but what about east-west traffic? You will probably need to bring another pair of load balancer, and you end up with islands of load balancer everywhere. You need to size properly those physical or virtual appliances. While with AVI, it's not the case. You just bring some licenses to the AVI controller, or you can use the VMware Cloud Services as a location to manage your licenses. And from this location, basically, you will consume whatever you need in the different area of your load balance of your SDDC, right? So here we provide a very unique advantage, is that the fact that you can consume the license. And of course, if for this amount, this type of traffic, you need to scale, The service engine will just contact the AVI controller to make sure that you have enough license. And all of a sudden, as I have demonstrated last week, you can scale the amount of service engine for your application. So it's not about scaling up, as I mentioned, it's also about scaling out, increasing the amount of service engine for your application. And at the end of the day, it's also less expensive because you reduce your TCO, your total cost of ownership for this solution, especially because you have only one single management point, and this management point will communicate with your different ecosystems, AWS, GCP, NSX, vCenter. It will communicate with everything, and it will orchestrate the lifecycle of service engines for you. You are not managing load balancers, you are managing applications, right? It's also less expensive because if you are handling or if you are using physical appliances like F5 or other legacy load balancers, basically you need to forecast the amount of traffic years in advance. Well, with AVI, you just we need to know what is your current basically traffic, and little by little you can increase the licenses that you require. You don't need to buy something big, something that probably you will never need it for the next 3 years. You just buy what you need, and again, little by little, we can increase the amount of license. We can even decrease them if you don't need them any longer. So and just to justify or even to support this idea, actually think about the largest company in the world in the internet. Think about the Facebook, Apple, all the very big websites. What do you think they are using? Well, if you check yourself, you will see that they are using software load balancers, especially to terminate the TLS session, right? So you can double check this on your web browser. You will see the type of certificate that those guys are using. They are using a software solution. And this is why we definitely think that software will bring more agility, more scalability, it's more secure. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned, it is less expensive. So having said that, here you have different scenarios that you can use for your SSL TLS use case. For instance, you have the client connection encrypted. So as you can see here on the first one, there is a TLS session between the client and the load balancer. On the second one, you have no TLS session, you have clear traffic between the client and the load balancer, and then encrypted traffic between the load balancer and the application server instances. On the third scenario here, everything is encrypted from the client to the load balancer and from the load balancer to the servers. On the last one here, we have only one session from the client directly to the servers, right? So the good news is we support all of those use cases. I think the most common one is the first one, where you have client SSL or TLS between the client and the load balancer. And I would say the third one here is also very popular. The last one, it works, we support it, but if we cannot decrypt the traffic at the load balancer level, you will miss all the good capabilities of AVI for observability, analytics, and logs. That's why, again, I think the most common ones, they are the number one here, this one, and the third one here, right? Give me just 1 sec because I noticed that there is nobody to handle the Q&A. So I just want to make sure if someone from the team can join us. Just give me 1 sec. All right, let me see if someone can join us just to make sure that we can handle your question. I can see one question about automatic scaling of service engines. Yes, I believe it needs enterprise license. So for this one, probably I'm not sure actually enterprise is required. I think for instance, if you refer to NSX, the basic license for NSXT, I think you can do automatic scaling. I will double check this one. Give me just again 1 sec just to reply to someone else. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so hopefully someone will join for the Q&A. Sorry about that. I thought someone has been assigned, but I'm not 100% sure. All right, let's move on, and I'm sure someone will join later. All right, so when we have, and I can see my colleague Roberto is connected. Hi, Roberto. Thank you for joining on
Hi,
such.
Nick, no problem.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's probably my mistake because I'm not sure if someone was assigned or not. But anyway, let's continue this one.
Problem.
And we are talking about SSL TLS. So this is the one which is quite important here because most of the time coming from the hardware background here, we are hearing about the certificate type of RSA, right? And here we are comparing basically RSA versus elliptic curve certificate. And the takeaway of this slide is just to make sure that you understand that there is nothing wrong to use elliptic curve certificate. RSA is probably more common, and it's probably because of the origin of the SSL termination. Before, as I mentioned, it was more or less always in hardware appliances, and coming from these hardware appliances with all the ecosystem, the FPGA, the ASIC, and everything which is used here, RSA was more used than elliptic curve certificate. But as I mentioned, if you check the big websites like Facebook or like Apple or the big, very important name of the internet, they are all using elliptic curve certificate. And we have many reasons for that. The first one is probably because we are talking about security, right? So if you compare basically the capabilities in terms of encryption between elliptic curve certificate and RSA, you see the point at the bottom of the slide here. An elliptic curve certificate 256 and 56-bit key is equivalent to an RSA 3000 key. So for a security standpoint here, we see that it works way better than RSA if you are using elliptic curve certificate. And if you are using a software solution here, elliptic curve will scale better than RSA. This is one reason also we encourage you to use elliptic curve certificate. And the last one is about the support of perfect forward secrecy, which we will review just after this slide here. It provides a better support for PFS. Having said that, in the AVI solution, we support both of them, right? So we encourage you to use elliptic curve certificate, but definitely you can use both of them. If I share my screen with the Academy controller, let me go back to the Academy controller, this guy here. It's the same controller that you can use on your side here. You remember on day one, I have created one application. I think this is this guy here. So let me edit this application. And you see here, it works only on port 80, TCP 80 without SSL enabled. So the first thing that you want to do if you want to enable SSL between the client and between the load balancer is to enable SSL on the list of service port, right? So one of them should be SSL enabled. So what I will do here, I will add one port. I will add port 443 here. And for TCP 443, I want to enable SSL. And as soon as I enable SSL, you can see some SSL settings which just appeared. And on those SSL settings, you have two main things to select. The first one is this SSL profile, which basically define the ciphers that you will use for this SSL session between your client and your load balancer. And the second one is the SSL certificate. So let's say out of the box, we provide some SSL profile, and I want to use this one, for instance, this system standard. You will see that we can modify them. And along with the SSL profile, you see here, I can select some certificate. So as you can see, some of them, they are called -EC. And the first one here is not called -EC because it's an RSA certificate. This is the one, again, provided out of the box that you can use if you want. This is a self-signed certificate. So you know that probably you will get a warning if you go to one of the websites using this certificate. You will get your internet browser saying, "Oh, this is a self-signed certificate. Do you trust this one or not?" So beware that if you use this self-signed certificate, you will get this warning, right? But my point here is to mention that I can use this default cert, and simultaneously I can use this this other one here, this elliptic curve certificate. And again, we support both of them, right? You don't need to change, you don't need to choose between one or the other. The only thing here, our recommendation is to use elliptic curve certificate because it scales more, and when it's about security, it's more secure for the same length of key than an RSA certificate, right? So just give you some information here on how you can enable TLS between the client and the virtual service. You remember what I have said last week on day 2 and also this morning? When it's about finding the settings in AVI, think about if you are looking for parameters which are related to the client, you go to the virtual service because the virtual service is where we contain all the parameters for the client-facing configuration. If you are looking for parameters for the servers, you go to the pool because they are server-facing configuration. So this is why my question is, if I want to configure TLS between the load balancer and the servers, I will go to my pool because they are server-facing configuration, right? So here it's only the TLS session between the client and the load balancer. If I want to configure the TLS session between the load balancer and between the servers, in this case, I go to my pool. And if I go to my pool here, you will see that I have an SSL tab here. And from this SSL tab, I can also select basically what I want to use as a profile here. I can select a PKI profile, and I can select also a certificate. So you have the option here to basically configure TLS between the client, the load balancer, and between the load balancer and the servers, right? All right, let's go back to the slide deck. I will go through this information a little bit later. So when you enable TLS, if you need to select if you enable perfect forward secrecy or not. And basically, just to illustrate the why of perfect forward secrecy, we have this scenario. Basically, you have different TLS session here between your client and your load balancer, and everything is based on a single private key here, right? So if someone can have your private key here, it can de-encrypt, it can see all the traffic for all your TLS session. So the idea behind the scene when it's about enabling PFS is to have the same capability here, but as you can see here, we have some temporary keys that you can use for different TLS session or for different period of time for your TLS sessions. So as you can see, I still have my private key here, which is a gray one. But from this gray private key, I will be able to temporarily create some keys. You see the blue one here for this session, or this green one here for the other session, or the purple one for the last session here. Therefore, if later someone can get access to my private key, he cannot retrieve actually all the traffic. He cannot get all the clear traffic to decrypt it because he is missing one key here. So keep this in mind. This is better to enable PFS. And if you think about physical appliances, we were talking about differences between software appliances and physical appliances for this use case of TLS. What will happen if tomorrow, let's say, your legacy F5 physical appliance is dead, right? You will call F5. Those guys, they will tell you that probably you need to RMS this physical appliance. You will send this physical appliance to F5 just to make sure they can repair this one. And what will happen? You will share data that are directly in the hard disk of your physical appliance, and you will share the private key here. So when we are saying that even software is more secure than hardware, it's just an illustration of this. In AVI, if you have an issue with your load balancer fabric, your AVI controller, you will never send something back because everything is software. So probably what you will do is you will open a case with the VMware team, and someone will connect, will have a look, probably will troubleshoot things, but you will not get access to your private keys, right? So this is also one big difference between something completely virtualized software and the physical appliance here. So when it's about PFS, you need also to think about your visibility tool that you have inside your organization. Because as you can see here, when you enable PFS, that could blind your network monitoring solution. Let's say you have a packet broker solution just to record everything, to see everything on your network. If this guy gets encrypted traffic with PFS, that could interfere because he will not get the keys basically to decrypt the traffic. So what we used to do before PFS is just copy basically the private key. You paste the private key within your packet broker solution, whatever it is, and you get the decrypted traffic. With PFS enabled, because we have this rotation of keys, that will not work the same. So you need to think about new architecture to make sure that your visibility tool will get access to all the network packets without this TLS layer. And to do that, one way of doing this is you can basically duplicate the packet from the service engine to a different destination. So this is basically the use case number one here that you can see. We still have TLS between the client and the load balancer, and between the load balancer and the application server instances. But what we are saying is we say to the AVI controller in the configuration, we say for this virtual service, we want to copy the packets to something else. And this is where basically you can configure this. We have this mirroring features that is fully supported that you can use. And in this case, your IDS or whatever you are using here will get a copy of the traffic, which is fully unencrypted, so no worries at all. The second use case here is basically your visibility solution is installed between the load balancers and between the servers. And because you are not doing encryption from the load balancer to the backend servers, in this case, you can get a clear copy of the traffic. And of course, even if AVI is not a legal recording solution, especially to record each single packet, this slide reminds you that we have plenty of analytics, but again, we are not here to replace whatever solution you have right now. We are just here to help for your troubleshooting journey with all the logs and analytics, but keep in mind that we bring plenty of real-time metrics and observability capabilities as I have demonstrated many times in day 1 and day 2. All right, when it's about TLS performances, again, some people will tell us we need to make sure that your solution can scale, right? And one way of scaling the solution, as I mentioned, is always to provide more CPU, more memory to your load balancer. Either it's a physical appliance, virtual solution, it's the same. More I give you CPU, more I give you memory, more I can scale, right? And this is also true for AVI. I mean, if you have a service engine group, you remember I told you that on day 2, you define some values basically to make sure that your new service engines will be deployed according to the service engine group parameters, like how many vCPU, what is the size of the memory, what is the size of the disk. And if you are using AVI in the public cloud environment, you will define what kind of instance flavor you want to use, T2 medium for AWS or something else for Azure or GCP, right? And this defines a template that the AVI controller will use to spin up or to deploy service engine. But we have another capability that we want to highlight is a scaling out capability. You remember you have one application, one virtual service. Today it uses 2 service engines. Tomorrow you can scale this application by using 3 service engines, 4 service engines. So you have this elastic fabric of service engine, even for one single application. And this gives you the capability to scale in terms of TLS, TPS, transaction per second, right? And we used to do an exercise leveraging the GCP environment, the Google environment, where we were able to reach more than 1 million TPS transaction per second, right? So the message that we want to send you is, don't worry, we can scale very high. First, because we have this scaling up capability as the others have, but we have also the capability to scale out. And because of this capability, the entire load balancer fabric can scale very high. We have some numbers here that we are sharing with you. So basically, you have this table which lists some ciphers that we are using. You see that we have 2 types here. We have the elliptic curve type of certificate, and we have the RSA type of certificates. So what do we see here? You see that the 3rd column here tells you if PFS, perfect forward secrecy, is enabled or not. And you see the number of TPS per core that you can reach. And you see here it's TPS per core, right? Per virtual CPU. It's not TPS per service engine. And remember what I have told you about the license. At the end, with the AVI solution, you pay for the data plane only. How many vCPU you are using for your entire estate of service engine. This is the number which will give you the amount of license that you need to buy, right? This is why here we are talking about per core or per vCPU. And what we can see here is for elliptic curve, you can reach up to 3,000 TPS per vCPU, right? When PFS is not enabled. If you enable PFS, in this case, this number will drop to 2,500. But see the same numbers when it's about RSA. In this case, you see from 3,000, we are dropping to 1,000. And from 2,500, we are dropping to 550. So this is why, again, even if we do support 2 types of certificate, we encourage you to use the elliptic curve type of certificate. And as it is mentioned on the slide, if you again add more CPU, if you scale up or if you scale out, you can see those numbers increasing quite linearly. All right, so give you some information about the number here. Let's talk about certificates and keys, right? But before doing that, I just want to explore something on the UI. It's about the SSL profile. So let me go to the UI. If I can retrieve my UI, here it is. So from the virtual service screen, you can basically edit the SSL profile that you are using, or you can create a new one if you want. And what I want to do first, I want to create a new one here. So just to show you how you can create a new one, of course, you give it a name, you give it a type, right? So what the type will define basically if this SSL TLS profile will be used for the AVI controller itself. In this case, it will be the system type, or if you are using this one for an application, right? So let's move on this application use case here. And what do you see here on the top right? You see some security score, you see some rating, and you see some compatibility rating, performance rating, compatibility rating, right? So of course, depending of your choice in this specific window at the middle, this will influence what you see here on the right side, the SSL rating, right? Let's see, right now, by default, the version of TLS which is accepted, it's TLS 1.2. If I just try to add something like SSL 3.0, which is not very good and secure here, you see that my security score drops from 100 to 70. So you need to think about this, which version of SSL/TLS I can use here. Something good to use right now, it's probably TLS 1.2 and also TLS 1.3. So I can just remove this one here. So if you are using something like this, it's pretty good for a security perspective, right? So think about the versions that you can use. And sometimes it's not only about security requirement, it's also about the application that you are using. Some application, old application probably, or legacy applications, they will need to use old version of SSL. So think about this. We continue to support old version of application. It's also of TLS, sorry. It's also because some legacy applications require those outdated version, right? So once you have done that, if you scroll down here, you will get a table. And from this table, basically, you will select or you will enable some ciphers that you will use when your client will negotiate the TLS session with your load balancer, right? And from each of the ciphers that you see in this table, you have some indication about the security score. So is it something good for a security standpoint? Do I have PFS enabled or is it disabled? You see also a performance information grade, like how it scales basically. And you see also some compatibility information here. So at the end of the day, when you have this TLS session negotiated, what will happen is your client will expose, he will show to your load balancer what the list of cipher is supporting. The load balancer has also a list of cipher supported that you define just here. And those guys, they will be in agreement and they will select one of the common things that they do support together. So at the end of the day, this negotiating process is automatic, but you need to define basically what you do support in your SSL cipher. So if you want, you can change this one, the one that we provide here by default. If I just, you see, I can drag and drop basically something from the bottom to the top, and I can also disable something here. You can do whatever you want. If you want to configure something customized, you can do that by using this screen. No need to tell you that this is possible to do exactly the same by using the API instead of using the UI here. Also, you can see a different view. Here I am showing you the ciphers like in the table, but you can also define those guys by using a string that could be useful for if you are using this in another environment with another product. Sometimes it's good to pouvoir to be able to see those ciphers like this in a string instead of this list here, right? All right. So you define the ciphers, and when you have this defined, basically this goes into your profile, and this profile is applied into your virtual service. What else? Well, once you have your profile defined, basically you need to apply a certificate, right? And as I told you, here you have different certificates that are enabled out of the box, or you can define basically your own certificate. You can import your certificate. You can even make AVI aware of what kind of certificate authority you are using. And later you can even say to AVI, I want to renew this certificate automatically, just to avoid, this scenario where you have your application, it's leveraging a TLS session, including an SSL or TLS certificate. At some point, this TLS certificate will expire and my application will no more work properly, right? So we do support those use cases. If I show you directly in the UI, if you go under templates here, under security, what do we have? We have the SSL TLS profile that I showed you before. So you can create a new one, but we have also this SSL TLS certificates. And from here, basically, you can create a certificate. As you can see here, you can create an application certificate, a controller certificate. So sometimes we have the question, what if I want to change default certificate that we are using for the AVI UI? I didn't show you that this morning, but it is fully supported. If you go under administration, if you go under settings, access settings. So from here, you have multiple parameters that are related to the AVI UI itself. You can have this redirect HTTP to HTTPS, which is by default. So if you HTTP this Academy controller, it will redirect you to this HTTPS page. And you see here, for the UI itself of the AVI controller, you define which profile you want to use, along with which certificates we want to use. So right now, as you can see here, we have two certificates, elliptic curve, and we have also this RSA certificate configured for this controller Academy, right? And didn't show you that this morning, but also you have some settings that you can, where you can basically restrict who is accessing to the AVI controller. So if you want to configure some ACLs or some ACLs saying, I want to make sure that only those IPs they can access to my AVI controller, this is the right place to configure this. So let me go back to templates, security, and certificates here. So you are seeing all the certificates that we have in this AVI controller, and you can see also the intermediate CA that we have for those certificates in the list at the bottom here. And as I mentioned here, you can create a certificate directly from this UI here. So you can define all the parameters that you want if you want to create a certificate directly from the UI here. So what else I want to show you? Of course, you can also import certificates directly from the UI. And what AVI will do, it will manage the life cycle of those certificates. So you remember what I have explained on day one about analytics, and especially about the health of an application. If I go back to my application dashboard, you remember I told you that if I mouse over here, I have a health score. And this health score is made of a few numbers, the performance score. And you see at the end here, you have security penalty. So the security penalty right now it's 0, but it could be something like -10, -20, or something else. For instance, if you are using bad or weak ciphers for your SSL TLS session, in this case, you will get a security penalty. If you are using self-signed certificates, in this case, you will get a security penalty. So think about those parameters because they will influence basically the health score of your application. Having said that, you will see that tomorrow, for some application, we can trick those parameters. If let's say you have to use a weak cipher and you don't want to see this security penalty, we can change this in the analytics profile. We will review that tomorrow. But my point here is to mention that the AVI controller can manage the life cycle of your TLS certificate. One thing that we can do, we can create some alerts. So if I go under my operation here, if I go under my alert config, I can create one and I can say, let's say TLS cert is expired or is about to expire basically. And from here, I can say, I want to check for a source as an event here. And the object will be, I think it's virtual service here. Let me check if it's the case. No, it's not the case. It's not about virtual service, or it's about the event here. Let me just check this here. You see here, SSL cert expire, right? So you can configure basically a new alert here, and this new alert will monitor the health of your SSL cert. So if your cert is about to expire a few days before, you will get an alert. Remember, you can configure some SNMP trap, you can configure some syslog message, or you can configure also a control script, right? So you can leverage the capability of the product, basically to say, when my SSL cert will expire, what action I want to do. And this is where you create a new action here. And this action will tell you exactly what you want to leverage. Again, it could be an email notification, syslog message, SNMP trap, or control script. You remember a control script is a piece of Python code that you can leverage, that you can use inside your AVI controller, inside a sandbox, and you can basically run this Python script. So with this capability, you can interact with third-party API. So I'm sure you understand where I'm going. So basically here in this cert use case, you can say, okay, a few days before my cert will expire, I want to make sure my AVI controller will renew basically this cert, just to make sure that my application will continue to work and I will not experience this certificate which will be not valid any longer, right? So again, here it's very easy to integrate your AVI controller with third-party solution to make sure that you have automation everywhere. As I explained this morning, you have more applications to manage. If you are not using automation, it means that you will need to spend a lot of time clicking here and there. I was talking with a friend last time and he told me how painful it is for them to use manual things to manage certificates. Basically, you need to open an IT ticket. This IT ticket goes to a team. This team will ask for justification because there is a cost involved here. And at the end of the day, when you have plenty application, when you have a lot of application, it's not very good to do that manually because you want to make sure that this will go with automation. And therefore, if it goes with automation, you can scale. And here we provide the foundation to automate the stuff that is boring to do manually, thanks to those capabilities that I just showed you. Also, this slide mentions that in AVI, we record plenty of things. I didn't show you, but actually, if an admin of AVI does a modification of the configuration of anything in AVI, we will record this, right? Because we know that inside the AVI product, we have sensitive information, including SSL certificates, but also private keys associated with those certificates. So we want to make sure that if something wrong happened, we know exactly who did what. That's why also this morning I told you, don't use the admin user, just use specific admin users for the people who are managing the AVI team. And therefore, if you do that, you can understand and you can have the visibility on all the modifications that we have done, including if someone has imported or exported actually the key associated with a certificate. This is extremely sensitive information, so we want to monitor who is doing what. So how can we know exactly what happens to an AVI controller? Well, it's not difficult. As you can guess, it's related to operations here. And you have this event tab here, and you can see all the events, right? So I can see everyone which logged in this Academy controller. If I go specifically on my environment, on this guy, which is my demo environment for this workshop here, if I go under operations, if I go under all events, I can see what happened for the past 15 minutes, but let's say I can see also what happens for the past 3 hours. So from here, I can see exactly what we have done. And you see, I think I have installed this last week, so I can see all the things that have been configured to make sure that this application, this AVI controller is up and running. And if you remember here, if I just extend this guy, we have changed this app AVI. We did a modification. Remember, just before the break, what I have done, I have associated an SSO policy to this application to demonstrate how easily I can add an authentication layer to this virtual service, to this application. And if you see here, this is exactly the configuration that I have added. So you remember the metadata from my IDP, you can see all the information here. You remember all the stuff that I have done is just here, right? So my point here is if you have some people which are exporting the private keys, you will get the same type of entries here. And of course, based on this, you can log this to an external solution that you are using to monitor the security inside your organization, just to make sure that you are aware of what is happening. And it's exactly what you can see here on this slide, where you have this event where someone, Nathan, has exported this certificate. This is what I explained with the control script. Here we have the capability to do automated certificate renewal, just to make sure that you can do that automatically and without IT ticket as we used to do. Now, when we are talking about HTTP and HTTPS, one thing that we want to explain is, again, how you can do HTTP to HTTPS redirect. And to do that, it's exactly the same flow that I have described many times now. You check first on the template. So first of all, it's about redirecting traffic from the client to from HTTP to HTTPS, right? So because it's related to the client, this is client-facing configuration. So all the features that we are looking for will be inside the virtual service. And then inside the virtual service, remember the flow, you check the template. If you cannot achieve this within the template, you go to the policies. If you cannot achieve what you want to do with the policies, you go for data script, right? So this is exactly the flow that we can follow to configure an HTTP to HTTPS redirect. And actually, you can configure exactly this in your Academy controller. You have the capability to do exactly the same, so feel free to do it as I am doing it right now. So what we can do is we can go to my controller here. And basically, as I told you, this is client-facing configuration. So because this is client-facing configuration, I need to look inside my virtual service. So let's say I am checking for this guy here. I go to my virtual service configuration. I edit this virtual service configuration. And you see right now, I am listening only on port 443, right? So of course, because I am listening only on port 443, HTTP port 80 is not enabled. So if I want to make sure it works for port 443, what I will do, I will add port 80 here, right? Then I'm listening on port 443 and on port 80. On port 80, I don't want to have SSL, I want to see clear traffic, right? So I have the two ports, but it's not because I have the two ports enabled in this server port here that I am doing HTTP to HTTPS redirect. So as I've told you, the first location to check is always on the profile. Is it related to TCP layer 4 HTTP redirect? No, it's related to application. So if I check my application profile, system secure HTTP, if I edit this guy, you can see that under the security tab here, if you are a little bit curious, you will see that we have this SSL everywhere option. And under this SSL everywhere option, you see here we have HTTP to HTTPS redirect. So one way of doing this is to leverage this specific option, HTTP to HTTPS redirect, directly from the profile, right? So if I save this guy like this, the HTTP to HTTPS redirect is already enabled. Let me just do one thing here. You remember I configured this access policy here. Let me disable it just to make sure it does not interfere here. And if I save this guy, if I go back to my client here, and I remove the HTTPS here, you see automatically I have been redirected to HTTPS. So no need to create data script, no need to use the equivalent of iRules here, just use the built-in features of the product and you can do the same. If you want to do it with a policy, I told you the flow, you check the profile, and if you want to do it with a policy, again, it's quite easy. We'll just show you that in the UI. We'll not test it because of the time, but you go under policy, and it's, again, this policy is related to application. So I go to my HTTP request, and you create a rule saying, by the way, I want to see if there is a match on the service port. If it's port 80 here, I want to make sure I have an action, which is redirect here. And you can redirect to the same path here, but using HTTPS like this, right? So very easy to configure such things. Again, you can use the profile, you can use a policy, or if you can't do it with those things, you can use the data script. Another use case related to SSL or TLS, it's this server name indication. So basically here, you are using one specific VS, as you can see, and behind this VS, you have other child VS. And the traffic is routed basically from the parent VS to the child VS, depending of the FQDN or the server name indication. So as you can see here, all the traffic, a.rv.com, b.rv.com, or c.rv.com, if you resolve this FQDN, by DNS, it will give you this specific IP, 10.1.1.1. But given the name or given the path that you are using in your HTTP request, traffic will go to a different virtual service. So you see here, you have two levels of virtual service. You have the parent VS and you have the child VS. And actually, the demonstration that we have done with AKO today and also on day one, they are relying on this mechanism. We have one ingress, right? And behind this ingress, we have many different FQDN that are relying on this parent virtual service. So you can configure this for in a Kubernetes environment, as I mentioned with AKO, this is done automatically for you. You will not configure it. As soon as you will create an ingress, you will create this parent VS, and later, if you have other VSs relying on HTTPS, you will create those child VS. But you can also create this manually if you are using an application which relies on virtual machines, for instance, and you want to achieve the same. It's very easy. Actually, when you create a virtual service, close this guy. When you create a virtual service, you have the option, especially if you are using the advanced setup here, you select your cloud. So I want to use my default cloud vCenter environment. And what you will see here is you have this option here, virtual hosting virtual service, right? And as soon as I enable this, what do I see? I see the option to create a parent VS or a child VS. So if you configure a parent VS, you will create a VS VIP, or you will create or you will reuse a VIP that you already are using, right? So you create or you reuse the VIP. And later, when you create the child VS, actually from the drop-down list here, you can recall one of the parent VS that you are using, right? And this is exactly how you will create this. And what do you see here? You see the domain name, right? So this domain name value here is really what you are seeing in this slide with this a.avi.com, b.avi.com, and c.avi.com. And based on this domain name, actually, you will direct the traffic to the proper child VS from the parent VS. It's a very well-known use case that we wanted to describe. And just for your information, you can go further here, but we have two types of parent-child VS. The type that I am using right now is a type called SNI, as you can see here. But if I switch to this type here, enhanced virtual hosting, as the name suggests, this will give me some enhanced capabilities, which allows me basically to direct the traffic to the child VS based on more capabilities than the previous mode, which was the SNI virtual hosting type, right? So keep this in mind. If you are looking for more information here, we can always direct you to the documentation. We just want to show you that we have two types, one which is more basic and the other one which is a little bit more advanced. All right. Before we move on to the web application firewall chapter, Roberto, anything you want to share, you want to add based on the question or based on your knowledge? I'm sure you have plenty of things to say.
You put me on the spot, Nick, again. There are a few questions on the chat around mutual TLS, so client certificate authentication, which I answered. So yes, we do support client certificate authentication along with all the other authentication types. So we can basically validate a client certificate against a defined set of certificate authorities that are allowed to sign client certificates against certificate revocation lists. And then you can choose what to do if a client doesn't present a certificate, or if the which is the difference there between request and require. So if you set to require and the client doesn't provide a certificate at all, they won't be allowed access. If you have a revoke certificate, by default, we're going to reject access, but you can, through data scripts, actually take a different action. So, for example, you might redirect them to another server pool for some kind of remediation. For instance, we can also extract information from the client certificate, the entire certificate, or individual certificate fields, X509 attributes, and so on, and we can add those to usually HTTP headers, which is the simple option you can see here in the GUI. So Nick, maybe you can just show the drop down on the header value, HTTP header value.
Sorry, I was drinking and not really.
On the HTTP header value on the add request headers, just above where your cursor is.
Yeah.
Over to the right, just show the drop down.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can extract all of these parameters from the client certificate and then add the value to a header so that you can pass that information to the pool server. You can do more advanced things as well, again through data scripts, right?
Yeah. I think I can see one question. Is it possible to use SNI for backend connection from SC to pool members? I think we shared a slide, and I think the answer is definitely yes, we can. FTPS, I think I remember something here, but I'm not sure if we support it.
FTPS is a difficult one. We don't currently support FTPS. It's really not used that much these days. We've recently actually added FTP support. For a long time we didn't support FTP, again because it's pretty much going away, but we've got enough customers that are still have these legacy applications that we've added that support for active and passive FTP. FTPS is a little more complicated, and we haven't had enough customer requests for it as yet. SFTP is much easier, no problem at all with that, and SCP as well, but FTPS at the moment, no.
All right, thank you here, Roberto, for the clarification. Let's start the last chapter of the day, which is web application firewall, right? So when it's about web application firewall, let's say, just to clarify what we are targeting here. You have mainly, more or less, all of you guys, you have firewalls, right? You know, you have the classical firewalls like Checkpoint, Palo Alto, Fortinet, or the others. And here we're not talking about the same thing, right? This legacy, or let's say these firewalls that you are using, basically, they will check the IPs of your clients. They will just open some TCP ports, just make sure also that there is no like kind of TCP flooding or UDP flooding attacks. These kind of things they will protect your application for, right? But here we are talking about what the type of request that you are receiving for your application. Is that good? Is it valid? Is it malicious? Is it legitimate? Or is it traffic that you want to block, right? And as the name suggests here, we are talking about web application firewall, web application firewall. So it means that it's for web application. It's not for other application, it's for web application. But what we are seeing is a lot of applications, they are relying on HTTP, right? So if you think about an API, this is true for the AVI API, and it's true for a lot of APIs. The protocols that support this API, the foundation is HTTP. So when you have your physical load balancer or physical firewall or virtual firewall, what do you configure? Basically, you say, I want to accept. You have a rule saying from the IP of my clients, sometimes it's any, if traffic is coming from the internet, to my load balancer, I want to open HTTPS, meaning TCP 443, right? So you create this rule, and this is cool because it secures, it blocks all the traffic for the other ports. It also checks some it prevents some attacks to happen to your application. But inside the HTTP protocol, what does it do? Well, it does not check the type of request that you are sending to your application. It does not check if this specific request makes sense for your application, right? It does not check if the protocol that the request is using is valid. It's HTTP, but is it a proper HTTP, or is it some bogus or some wrong request that we are sending to your application? And for all those things, for all those use cases, you need to add another level of security. And this is why here we introduce the web application firewall. And from this morning, we are talking about security, right? So sometimes we say, oh, AVI provides WAF. That's true, but it provides way more than only web application firewall. This is included. So as soon as you have the enterprise license, you can leverage all the feature sets of the security of AVI, including web application firewall. So you are opening again a tunnel into your load balancer from external. And inside this tunnel, you want to check what is going on. You want to check that the traffic is legitimate. You want to check that the traffic will not hit, will not be harmful for your application. So this is why, again, we are using web application firewall. And when it's about web application firewall, we like to share this report coming from Verizon. If you check here, on this one here, we have the incidents, right? All the incidents related to security and the source, basically, of the problems coming from the privileges misuse, coming from the DDoS, and a lot of things. And you have web application here at the 5th rank, or the 5th position, right? But if you check here in terms of breaches, so when basically this incident will be fully exploited by the attackers, you see that web application comes number 1, right? And you end up by losing a lot of money for many reasons. But what I want to highlight here is web applications, they are at risk if they are not secured properly. And this is where basically you need to have a web application firewall in front of your web application. And because you have a load balancer here, the idea is it's not difficult to add an extra level of features directly in the service engine to protect your application. And before talking about web application firewall, I want to just recap what we have said from this morning. Remember, you have the policies to protect your application. Remember layer 3, layer 4 policies. You can select basically IP ranges. You can leverage the IP reputation database by saying, I don't want the bots to send traffic to my application. You can leverage the geo database by saying, I don't want to have this country going to my application. You have different tools for layer 3, layer 4, right? And then once you have applied this, you can go another level up, leveraging the application policies. In this case, you can say, oh, by the way, if I see that a client is using the same cookie or the same HTTP header many times, I don't want him to send this amount of requests. I want to rate limit the traffic coming from this specific cookie or this specific header. I want to rate limit the traffic. So what we are doing here is little by little, we are trying to make sure that the traffic going to your application is legitimate, is safe, right? So I'm saying this because I just want to tell you that this is not about only web application firewall, but at some point, we need to check that the request that you are sending to your application makes sense. Makes sense for a protocol standpoint. It makes sense based on your application. And if this is the case, in this case, yes, we want to send this to your application server instances. But what we are saying outside is that a lot of customers, a lot of people who we are talking with, they say that it's very complicated to use or to configure web application firewall. And you end up seeing web application firewall basically disabled or in a bypass mode for many reasons. One of the reasons is you have a lack of visibility. So you want to secure your application, you have your security department calling you and saying you need to enable WAF in front of this web application. So you are listening, you enable WAF, and minutes later or hours later, you have your application team calling you and saying, oh, by the way, since you have enabled WAF, my application is extremely slow. And because you have no visibility, you are like, okay, I'm not sure, let's wait a little bit. And then they call you back. You have the pressure from the security team, from the application team, and you need to take a decision. So this visibility, observability, you understand it's a pillar of the product, and we provide this in the AVI solution. We'll demonstrate this later. The second point here is the policy complexity. The problem with WAF is it's extremely complicated to configure. And also it's complicated to configure because it depends on your application. And as a network admin, as a cloud architect, as an infrastructure people, you don't know the application. You don't know how your application works. And you don't know if for this field, the application is waiting or is expecting your email address or is expecting an IP address or is expecting a country where you live. You don't know those kind of things, right? So if, because you don't know, this is difficult to configure a web application firewall. And the last point is about scalability. You buy a WAF today, and let's say you didn't expect this amount of traffic going to your application. And at some point, what you see is your WAF is overloaded. And because it's overloaded, it goes automatically in bypass mode, or you need to configure it like this, right? So for those reasons, we see some difficulties to configure and to use web application firewall. And as you can guess here, at least for the lack of visibility, you know that the AVI solution provides quite a strong capability in terms of observability, real-time metric. And you know what, for WAF, this is exactly the same. We provide you some overview about the WAF statistics, but we can also show you that for unique request, you can have all the information related to this request, why web application firewall has dropped this packet, or probably how long it took for the WAF to process this packet. So all those information, we provide this out of the box. For the scalability, I hope you guys, you have already the answer. You know that we can scale out, right? So if 2 service engines are not enough to enable WAF, guess what? What we can do, you can just scale out. So yes, it will influence the amount of license that you will consume, but you have nothing else to configure, right? So scalability, it's not a problem for us because of the architecture and because of the fact that we can run active, etc., what I have explained on day 2. Policy complexity, we will explain exactly how we handle this one with AVI, right? So here's this slide. Basically, I will not cover it again because it's more or less the same, right? It's about configuration complexity, performance impact, and also how you can adapt to the change. The last point here at the bottom of the slide is quite important here because the applications, they are changing quite a lot, especially with those new methodology, agile, CI/CD, all DevOps things that you guys, you know. Basically, applications are always changing, right? So how you can cope with those changes? Do you think you will need to update your WAF policy as soon as the application has been updated? Well, it is complicated to do that manually again. So here again, there is a need, given the scale of amount of applications that you have and given the scales of changes that you have for your application, you need to leverage automation. You need to leverage that you have a tool that can learn itself how your application works. And basically, this is how it works for web application. We have kind of different steps coming from the client here. You see, a client is sending a request to your application. So at the end of the day, if everything is fine, the client request will go through different steps. The first step is the allow list, right? At this first step, what we want to define is we know that for some, let's say, part of your application, it doesn't make sense to do some web application firewall signature check. It doesn't make sense to do some other security verification. So we want this request to go directly to the application server instances, right? And then we will save some CPU, we will save some memory, we will save some resources for the other packets, right? So let me give you an example here. Let's say you are testing your application, or let's say you have an application, and for this application, you have some images, right? So you know that if the traffic is going to /images, it's going to a specific pool, and you know that for this specific pool, there is no risk for an attack that can be blocked by the web application firewall. In this case, you will create an allow list here saying, if the URI is /images, you can go directly to the pool which handles these images, right? So the idea is we don't want to send all the requests for to be checked against the web application firewall signatures, right? So this is one example here, and this is the first step, this allow list here. What else? Well, after the allow list, we will get what we called a positive check. So a positive check is basically, as I told you, your application is waiting for a specific request or specific input that the client will need to enter. For instance, let's say you have a form, and in this form, you need to specify or to input an email address. In this form, you need to input your post address, or you need to input, let's say, your phone number, right? So this positive step here has the capability to learn your application. So little by little, it will learn how your application works, and it will know at some point that, oh, for this specific field, I know that Nick needs to input his email address. So if later someone is sending a request to your application, and for this field, this is not an email address, but this is something weird, like, you know, a shell command, or, you know, a scripting command. In this case, the positive check will go and say, this is not good. This request is not legitimate. So I will send this request to the negative step, which is the last step of this mechanism, right? If this request is legitimate, if we see an email address, in this case, directly we will send the traffic to the application server instances, right? But again, if we notice this is wrong, well, in this case, we will go for the last step, which is the negative check for your request. And the negative check for your request is basically made of different signatures. We have the application signatures, we have the OWASP defined attacks. It's all about signatures. And of course, as any security product, you need to make sure that you have the latest signature database. And to do that, remember what I've told you, when it's about licensing, you have a choice. You can decide, I want to connect my AVI controller to the VMware Cloud Services. And if you do so, you can automatically get update of those signatures. You can, of course, opt in or you can opt out. If you cannot connect your AVI controller to internet, in this case, you can always update those signatures, but you will need to do that manually, right? So here you have, let's say, a large picture of how the WAF will work, right? At the end, you have the signature or the negative security check. It's like a checkpoint here where we will double check, is this a request against this OWASP rules? Is this request against this application signature rules? And given the answer, this is correct, this is not correct, we will drop, or we will allow this request to go through the towards the application server instances. So it's quite important to remember basically this process, because it gives you a lot of information and insight about this specific feature that we bring. What I want to do, I want to demonstrate this, right? Because it's quite important. The only thing that I will not demonstrate is a scale out capability, because I've done that on day one, and I think I've done that on day 2 as well. So you guys, you know that we have a fabric of load balancers. So for WAF, this is the same. If you want to increase the fabric, you just scale out the VS, and all of a sudden you will get more service engine for your application. But for the other stuff, I want to demonstrate a few things. First, the visibility, and also I want to show you in the UI how you can enable WAF, right? So let's go to my AVI controller here. And what I have done here, you see I have one application which is called App Web Application Firewall, this guy here. And for this application, as you can see, I have always an FQDN. So if I just copy this FQDN, just to make sure first it works, let me bring this window just here. Let me just paste first this. Okay. And I think I have only HTTPS enabled for this application. So let's try it like this. Okay, so I have this application. You see it. I have my AVI controller here and my application here. I am using this Akisha application for demonstrating a web application firewall. And what I will do here, I will, first of all, I will show you how to enable WAF. So this is this guy here. You edit, and you see you will attach a WAF policy to your application, right? And right now there is none, right? So which means that WAF is fully disabled. So what I will do here, I will just use my default WAF policy, the ones that I get out of the box, right? And if I edit this WAF policy, what do I have? Actually, I have, under this WAF policy, I have a WAF profile. This WAF profile is quite important to understand because it defines many things. For your application, you define basically which version of HTTP you can use here, which method of HTTP you can use here. So again, you understand that this is also tied to your application to get those information. What else can we configure? You can define some restricted extension that you don't want to use, some restricted headers that you don't want to use as well. So all the different things related to your request here, you can define basically what you allow or what you will drop, right? So this is under the WAF profile, right? And remember, this WAF profile is also under the WAF policy here, right? And something quite important when it's about web application firewall, you have two modes: the policy mode, which is either detection mode or enforcement mode. And by default, this is detection mode, which means that if WAF, let's say, sees a request which is not good, he will basically just notify you, but he will not drop the request. If you are moving from detection mode to enforcement mode, in this case, WAF will intercept and it will drop the packet if it does not, or if it contradicts, or if it is not in agreement with the different rules that we are leveraging here. So let's start with detection mode, right? Let me just close this guy here. Sorry, I don't know where I am. And yeah, detection mode. So save this guy and save that guy as well. And what I will do here, I will send a specific request. I just need to find out where is my request, which is basically is a cross-site scripting type of attack. So I will copy my request here. I go to my website here and I just do like this, okay? And I search like this. And you see my site responded with this message here. So now I want to understand exactly what happened, and I go back to my application, my WAF application, and you see that WAF has been enabled because I have a shield here. So if I just go to the analytics, if I go to the logs, if I go here, I can check the significant and the non-significant logs. You see WAF here said passed. But the good thing is you can apply some filter here and you can see, actually, if I disable the non-significant, you can see that this guy here has been flagged. You see what was my attack? It was a cross-scripting thing here. And you can see exactly what I have sent. So WAF says basically, this request, this specific request, we think there is an issue. We think it's not a legitimate request, but hey, you are in detection mode, so I can't do anything, right? So what I want to show you is, remember what I've told you about the analytics. So right now you have only one request. So it's not very, let's say, a good amount of requests to give you some overview statistics about WAF. But let me show you what are the values at least. If you want to see the latency here, you go here, you check for the WAF latency, and you have plenty of information. Again, right now it's not very relevant because I have only one request. But you see basically all the information that you have when WAF has been triggered. And look at those guys here. If I extend this guy, you see exactly how long it took for you to analyze basically the header of your request. Same for the body of your request. Same for the response header and same for the response body. And you know exactly why this specific request has been flagged by the web application firewall. It's because it is basically, there is a match with those different signatures that we have here in this group, right? And later, let's say, you know that there is a false positive. And at some point, you will have false positive. So what you want to do is to make sure you can add an exception. You want to say, you want to configure your WAF saying, oh, by the way, this was not something threatening my application. This was a legitimate request. So what do you want to do? You see you have this plus button here. And by just using this UI, you can create automatically an exception. And later, if you send the same request, assuming that it was a legitimate request, this request will not be flagged. It will go directly to your application server. So we provide visibility, observability, and here you see we also provide a way to make sure we can handle very easily the exceptions that at some point you will need to do because of the false positives that you can get, right? So this is
Nick,
yeah.
Do you want to quickly show the recommendations button as well?
You know what? I'm not sure where it is, this one.
Scroll up, scroll up. Scroll up. The little icon there next to the timeline, the latency timeline, the 3 lines of the little tick, that one, yeah.
Okay, so you are best to describe this one than I am. So
okay, so this is something we've been working on over the last couple of releases, and we're still enhancing this as well. The idea is ultimately that we want to make the WAF as simple to use as possible and reduce the operational complexity. So one of the things that pretty much all of our customers tell us is that it's a lot of operational overhead to manage a traditional WAF platform. And what we're trying to do is take away that complexity. So Nick's already showed you can easily add exceptions just by clicking that plus button, which has been there for a long time. What we're now doing is adding something that's a little bit more informational. So this recommendation thing is going to give you this kind of description of an action that you can take, and if you expand one of them, you get a little bit more detail. So it actually tells you if you believe this is a false positive, then review the information that we're giving you below, and then you can just click with one click accept recommendations, and it will actually add all of these exceptions at once. And in other cases there might be a different recommendation, and you can just easily accept or reject that recommendation. So this is just a usability thing where we're leveraging the power of this analytics platform that you've been seeing over the last few days.
Thank you for that, Roberto. Thank you. So we show you that from this UI you can get a lot of insight about what is going on, but at some point also you will get probably frustration from the client of your application, because those guys, they can be blocked by the web application firewall and they don't understand, right? They have, let's say, normal utilization of the application, and somehow at some point the WAF will block them. So you want also to make sure that for those users, you can help them. And again, the analytics and observability capability of the product is very helpful here. Let me show you. Actually, remember here, we have this WAF policy, and it has been enabled in a detection mode only. So only detection, no enforcement. So if I take this WAF policy and I switch from detection mode to enforcement mode here, and I save this guy, and I want also to make sure I can leverage this error page profile, right? You want to make sure that if web application firewall blocks the traffic, you want to redirect the user to something which is understandable, which is clear for the user, or at least gives you some clue about why this traffic has been blocked. So I will just edit basically this custom error page here. So I will edit the page just to make sure it has been defined properly here. So I think here what you need to do, if you want to have something, just remove those comments just here. I'm not sure if I need a trailing space here, but I will save it like this. I save this guy like this. And now what I expect, if I go back to my page here, and you see, so again, we have switched from detection mode to enforcement mode, and I redo exactly the same. And you see here what is happening? We have this web page telling us basically, please contact your application admin, and as you can guess, you can change everything, the color, the logo, or whatever you want. You can customize this HTML page. But the good thing is you are an AVI admin, and now someone is complaining. Or you are an application admin and someone is complaining. You have access to the AVI controller. You have only, let's say, read-only view because you are not the owner of the AVI solution, but still, you see exactly which application we are talking about, app_web application firewall. So if I go back here, I know that I am under the right application here. And what I can do, I can just copy basically the request ID. And from this, remember the power of the logs. Here, you can apply a filter, and this filter, it's extremely easy. It's just the request ID here. And now you have all the information. As we have mentioned, you know exactly what happens, and you know why this request has been dropped. You see exactly which CRS rules has matched this request, and therefore why web application firewall has dropped this packet. So exactly the same, but you see how easy it is to retrieve the information and basically to get information about the why, which is very important, because if the application team again calls you and tells you why you have dropped this and you don't have explanation, this is complicated. Here you have some information that you can share, and later you can review if it's again a valid signature that you want to use, or if it's a false positive. And in this case, hopefully you understand how easy it is to add an exception by this plus button, or reviewing the insights behind the scene, as Roberto explained just before. So this web page here is very useful for your troubleshooting journey, right? Having said that, it's we are a little bit late. Sorry about that. But I probably on tomorrow I will get a little bit of time to explain you the other steps that you need to configure web application firewall, especially to understand how the WAF can learn about your application automatically, and how you can also leverage the other configuration steps here. But having said that, it's I think it's just we're on the top of the hour, so I don't want to take too much of your time. I hope this session was useful for you. I think we have reviewed plenty of things today about security related to AVI, application security, SSL, and finally web application firewall. And trust me, it's not easy to speak about web application firewall in like 40 minutes. We have plenty of things to tell you, but we need also to make sure we finish on time. So I want to thank you everyone for all your questions, for all your time that you spent with me. Again, hopefully it was helpful. If you have any questions or anything you want us to handle, you can always send an email to learnavi@vmware.com. Again, learnavi@vmware.com. And if Roberto, you have nothing else to share, I want to thank you again, everyone.
Nope, nothing else. We're at the top of the hour.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Roberto, for the help at the last minute.
No worries.
We'll see you tomorrow at the same time. You have a good day. See you tomorrow. Thank you.